Welcome back to the channel. This is Freddy Storm and you are watching What If Naruto Was the Most Wanted Pirate of Blue Planet. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Not wasting no more time, let's start the story.
A boy was born into the world in 1436, during the Age of the Sea. But for some reason, this boy was raised by himself. He had no parents, no caregivers, nothing. However, it didn't take long for this boy to make friends. Friends who would always be there for him. One day, in 1454 AOS. This boy would assemble his friends and form a pirate crew to sail the seas in a ship. When the captain first set sail, nobody could have predicted that he would one day become a pirate legend, or that his name would be up there with that of Whitebeard, Gold D. Roger, Monkey D. Garp, and so many others. He encountered other soon-to-be legends during his time as his ship's captain, including Edward Newgate, Gold D. Roger, Silvers Rayleigh, Shiki the Golden Lion, and others. One day, he would create an odd rivalry between Roger and Edward Newgate. While maintaining a friendship, the captain would continue to travel the world, passing through the Man Islands along the Grand Line, if only because he enjoyed it. In contrast to others who would have a specific place in the world like Roger or Newgate, his only real objective was to travel the world. A terrible tragedy befell his crew in the year 1490 AOS, one of the many years he served as captain. However, this event would not be found in a history book. Only the outcome of this apocalypse would be the captain lost his will to live, his ability to love, and his happiness. One day after this incident, all that was left was a raging anger so unbridled and unmanaged that anything that stood in his way would perish. Before this incident, the captain had been a laid-back guy who was joyful, upbeat, mischievous, and many other wonderful things. He was compared to the man who would become the Pirate King by people like Whitebeard. The fact that those who knew him would say, whatever the Marines and world government did to anger him, deserved it. When this captain stormed Marineford and used all of his power on them, was evidence of their devotion to and respect for him as a friend as well as a rival. However, this marked the beginning of what would eventually be referred to as Judgment Day, when the captain would attack the Marineford head-on, demonstrating why he was known as Poseidon. By ordering the very seas to attack Marineford, he demonstrated that he was a formidable foe. Before he engaged Vice Admiral Garp and Admiral Sengoku in combat, he had already killed over 100,000 Marines, Vice Admirals, and a few admirals. They reduced the Marineford to rubble in that battle. But despite exerting all of his strength and energy on the others, the captain was unable to defeat the two. The captain disappeared from the face of the planet after that day. However, his self-exile was short-lived when the Marines finally apprehended Gold D. Roger in 1500, the start of the Great Age of Pirates. Shiki, like many years earlier, went on a rampage through Marineford before Sengoku and Monkey D. Garp brought him down. Shiki was sent to level 6 of Impelled down for his actions, in contrast to the captain who managed to escape unbeknownst to everyone. Poseidon, an old friend of the great pirate Gold D. Roger, had watched from a distance as his old friend was sentenced to death that year. Roger's pre-death speech also prompted pirates to search the Grand Line for his One Piece treasure. An era known as the Great Age of Pirates began with this incident. Following Roger's execution, Edward Newgate, now known as Whitebeard, began to gain notoriety as the strongest man in the world. In order to preserve their legacy, Whitebeard continued to search for the captain and tell his crew stories about him and Roger, even though he had a large family. The captain returned to the world in 1516 AOP. He only made an appearance, though, to tell a man named Monkey D. Dragon that he wanted to join the Revolutionary Dragon. Actually asked why he of all people would want to join him, since he was known as the world's most dangerous criminal after he had recovered from his shock and surprise at seeing such a legend in front of him still looking very young. The captain would simply inform him that the world's most wanted pirate should accompany him with the intention of overthrowing the world government. The captain began his comeback to the world as a member of the Revolutionary Army. This captain would be known for all time as Uzumaki Naruto, the Poseidon, the world's most wanted pirate. Now, it was 1522 AOP. Sandy Island, Kingdom of Alabasta. The Nanohana Alabasta had a long history and was a recognized kingdom approximately halfway through the first segment of the Grand Line. It was situated on Sandy Island. A summer island was Sandy Island, with a number of cities and towns as well as a huge river running down the center. It was possibly one of the largest islands in the Grand Line. Finding Marines was not surprising because it was also a popular destination for many roving pirates. A peculiar-looking man with a bottle of sake in his hand was seated on a bar stool at the counter of your typical neighborhood bar. However, a long black cloak with a hood covered him from head to toe, making it difficult to see much of him. The only sign that he had a weapon on him was hidden beneath the cloak on his back, which appeared to be a long pole with strange shapes on either side that extended from his right shoulder to his left hip. With a sigh of satisfaction, the man put the bottle back on the counter after taking a sip of his sake and feeling the cold liquid slide down his throat. This is where Shichibukai member Crocodile maintains his not-so-secret criminal organization, Baroque Works. Then, how likely is it that he would be in the exact location of my target? When someone bumped into him, his bottle of sake fell out of his hand and smashed on the counter, waking him from his reverie. His father was right, he would get himself into a lot of trouble. A cocky, almost mocking voice said, "Ha! You should pay more attention to your surroundings." From his side indeed, this man was not at all haughty. Or did you drop that bottle out of shock of who I am? The man was not listening, though he had lost as much as he had gained over the years, but he knew that sake would always endure and that it was the only thing that kept him sane. He believed that sake was the beverage of the gods, sent down from heaven to provide happiness in a bottle to people like him. He would take what he could get, even though it obviously did not compare to ramen, the seemingly forgotten food of the gods. His reason for freezing up was evident, of course, and he would have avoided Sandy Island entirely if the poor, soon-to-be trash man had known that no one ever survived after interfering with his drinking or, heaven forbid, smashing his bottle. As he looked up at the man, the cloaked man asked calmly but icily, "Should I care who you are?" The man was taller than him. About 8 feet 2 inches. He had no undershirt, only a big pirate's captain coat that hung around his shoulders, black pants, and black shoes. His face was not a pretty sight, and he had a scruffy black beard and scruffy-looking black hair. He didn't know who this guy was, and he didn't care. "Hey, I have 65 million belly as a bounty. You believe I only got that from?" "Don't care." The cloaked man waved his hand dismissively, interrupting the larger man, and then pushed himself off the bar stool and up from the counter. "I don't care about your name or bounty. The only important thing is that you broke my bottle of sake, and I don't take that well, do you understand?" He clenched his fist and asked, a secret smile on his face. "Yeah, I got ya." The tall man's crew laughed as much as he did after he nodded. "I know you think you're a hot shot, thinking you can talk down on me." With a hint of sarcasm in his voice, he said, "I don't take kindly to that." He held his sword by his side and slowly withdrew it from its sheath. The cloaked man sighed as the sword was unsheathed, asking, "Why must fools like you always have to do things the hard way?" The captain was only able to see the cloaked man's hand outstretched after slapping the sword away before the other came in quickly, hitting him in the stomach and blasting him through the bar doors, sending splinters of wood flying everywhere as the captain was blown out in the sandy streets. The sword had been knocked out of his hand faster than the captain could keep up with, stabbing into a wall at high speed. "Captain, Captain, you are a bastard. Dare you? Go after him, assassinate him?" The cloaked man turned to face the pirate crew, and as he looked up, his hood cast black shadows over his face, leaving only his eyes visible, glowy sapphire orbs that radiated energy like nothing any of them had ever seen. A cold, hard-killing intent bared down on the crew of unfortunate pirates, who fell unconscious one by one until they were all out cold. "How shokuhaki, I always love using that," the man thought to himself as he watched the last pirate fall. The other bargoers gaped at the man, as if he had just glanced at the pirates and left them unconscious. One man was so shocked that he tipped his hand over, spilling the sake he had been drinking all over his trousers, which he chose to ignore in favor of staring at the man. How this man, who, despite his odd appearance, seemed normal enough, could take out an entire crew of pirates so easily was the only thing the other patrons could think about. "Tashigi, get all the men together and have them search the entire town for his crew." When the cloaked man looked out the open doorway, he saw a white-haired man rush past, jumping over the pirate's dead body as if it hadn't been there. "Looks like Luffy's here already. All right, it's time." He left the bar without saying anything to anyone, stepping over the dead pirates without a car. Town center. "It's stunning. I think it's great." At 5 feet 6.5, a young, slender girl with brown eyes and shoulder-length orange hair said. Grinning broadly, she was regarded by many as being very attractive, if not beautiful. On her left shoulder, she had a blue tattoo that symbolized pinwheels and mikan. At the moment, she was dressed like a dancing girl, with a gold bracelet on her left wrist, 2 gold bangles around the top of her arm by her shoulder, and the log pose. Her dancing attire was essentially a long, light blue shirt with frills and a skimpy dark blue bra that exposed her waist and stomach. Showcasing her trim figure that would make men salivate. On her back was a pink cloth with tiny sleeves that clung to her shoulders. This was the Straw Hat Pirate's navigator, Nami, a pirate. Another woman of comparable stature remarked, "I hate to complain when you asked us to wear these, but..." She had long blue hair that was pulled back into a ponytail and had 2 bangs hanging down, one on each side of her head. She also had a very slim build, with large breasts that stood out and long, thin arms and legs. Although her long skirt was dark blue with purple trims and similar frills, She wore an outfit that was similar to Nami's in addition to being dark blue. Her bikini or bra showed off the underside of her breasts and accentuated them. She wore a long piece of white cloth that ran down her back. Just like Nami with a drop of perspiration, she cried, "Sanji-san. These make us look more like dancers than normal citizens." This was Nefertari Vivi, the princess of Alabasta and the daughter of Nefertari Cobra. "That's okay. Dancers are citizens," said the previously mentioned Sanji, drooling from his mouth and clasping his hands while gazing at the two stunning women. Sanji was a slender, long-legged, blonde young man who wore his hair brushed over one side of his face and was frequently well-dressed. Sanji's characteristic eyebrows were one of his physical characteristics, though at different ends. They both formed a spiral. The outer end of his right eyebrow formed a spiral, and the inner end of his left eyebrow did the same to blend in with the desert. He was now wearing a coat that resembled a cloak. "It's okay as long as they don't find out you ladies are a princess and pirate, right?" Vivi trailed off, looking down at her outfit, a little uneasy about bearing so much skin, but walking through the desert might be a little. She said she was aware of her beauty, and that was the issue. It was impossible to predict what kind of men would mock her, say hurtful things, or even attempt to kidnap her for the sole purpose of using her body. Sanji trailed off. "If you get tired, I'd be happy to carry you," as the idea of pushing Vivi against him made blood run out of his nose. Nami pinched the bridge of her nose and her eyes twitched at the drooling Sanji. What could be better than that? She sighed after thinking angrily. As he turned to face the other Straw Hat pirates, Sanji appeared to get over his moment. He smoked a cigarette and laughed as he said, "Even if you guys are camouflaged not to look like pirates, compared to the girls you still look like bandits." Through gritted teeth and a tick mark above both eyebrows, one of them questioned, "How are you any different?" He was a muscular young man of average size with a green haramaki wrapped around his right hip. He carried 3 swords that he could easily draw with his left hand. He could pull his swords out with this hand before he sat down, but for now, his right hand was resting over them. His left earlobe was adorned with 3 identical gold earrings. Zoro wore black pants tucked inside black boots and a black bandana tied around his left arm, which he typically tied around his forehead during combat. Zoro wore a simple white shirt with 3 buttons at the collar. His camouflage was a scarf that resembled a turban and wrapped around his head and neck, exposing his face in order to blend in with the desert and, presumably, conceal his identity. He also wore a stripped jacket over his shirt. This was Roronoa Zoro, a former bounty hunter, pirate, and Straw Hat crew swordsman. Another young man questioned the final member of the group, "Huh? What ya doin', Chopper?" He was a slim, tan teen with a long nose and black curly hair. He was dressed in brown overalls with a white sash, a dark yellow plaid bandana, a blue and white striped armband on his left arm, special sniper goggles, and no shirt underneath. He also had a yellow satchel with him, which he used to keep all of his tools and devices. He blended in by wearing similar coverings to Zoro. This was Usopp, the Straw Hat Pirate's sniper. The addition of the previously mentioned Chopper to the group was peculiar. When he ate the devil fruit Hito no Mi, human fruit, he changed from a reindeer to a toddler-sized human-reindeer hybrid. This allowed him to change his appearance depending on the circumstance and change into a hybrid and full human. A metal plate that had been broken in a fight when Chopper was younger was always wrapped around his left antler. First he wore a shirt with a green-lined collar, then a larger one with giant sleeves that was light blue with dark blue linings, and finally a fuzzy top hat that was pale red, pink with a sideways medical cross. In addition to his hat, he wore a blue backpack with the same sideways medical cross on it. Additionally, Chopper had a unique characteristic that no other reindeer possessed: a blue nose, whereas typical reindeer had black ones. He was the Straw Hat Pirate's doctor, and his full name was Tony Chopper. But he decided to wear a duck head-shaped helmet in an attempt to blend in with the others, in an attempt to mimic a real duck. He responded to Usopp's question with the word, "Quack." However, he quickly removed the helmet and started massaging his nose because it was feeling funny. "My nose feels like it's going to fall off," he whimpered, his face twisted. "Huh?" Vivi asked, turning to face Chopper, and her eyes widened in concern as she noticed him pulling at his face with his paws using his first name instead of the others. She frowned and said, "Your nose must be sensitive, Tony-kun. Nanohana is famous for its perfume." Chopper asked, his eyes watering, "Perfume?" When Nami produced an odd-looking bottle, Vivi trailed off, "There are extremely powerful ingredients in it." Nami sprayed the perfume on her and smiled calmly as the scent reached her nostrils. "Like this?" she asked. It got to Chopper even quicker. "Ah," he cried, his eyes wide as the pungent odor caused tears to form. "Stop it, stop it." With a dreamy expression and a single visible eye, Sanji emerged behind Chopper and exclaimed, "Quadruple A. I'll fall in love all the way to the gates of hell." His mouth was wide open, and he managed to keep his cigarette in his mouth while he gazed at Nami. Zoro drank from a bottle of sake and asked bluntly, "Can you get any dumber?" Sanji yelled, "What?" at the heartless swordsman. Nami questioned the young princess, "Well, I've gathered the supplies to make a journey through the Alabastan desert. Where are we going, Vivi?" She gritted her teeth and furrowed her brows at the thought of Crocodile of the Shichibukai. "Well, first and foremost, I want to stop the rebellion. We don't know when they might rise up and cause needless bloodshed in the base of the rebellion, where the leader lives," she said. "I's an oasis town called Yuba to go to Yubawi." "Wait, hide." Zoro rushed forward, snatching Vivi and placing her next to a wall that they all pressed against at his signal. "What?" Vivi asked, her eyes wide, her heart pounding at the abrupt movement and warning. Zoro asked, "Marines, why are they here?" Without naming anyone, he remarked, "Sheesh, what a ruckus," as he watched a Marine battalion pass by their position as he continued to search. His eyes widened upon seeing their captain, the target of the pursuit. "Did they find a pirate or something?" he asked. "Not you." The captain of the Straw Hats was well known for donning his signature straw hat, which Goldie Roger had given to him when he was a young boy by the fabled pirate captain, red-haired Shanks. He was dressed in a red vest, sandals, and short blue trousers. In addition, he had short black hair and a scar beneath his left eye that was stitched up with 2 stitches. He was scrawny under his shirt, but his body was surprisingly well built. This was the Straw Hat Pirates' captain, Monkey D. Luffy, who consumed the devil fruit, Gomu Gomu no Mi. Gum Gum fruit. He was also rather ignorant or stupid, depending on which term was more appropriate. Luffy yelled, "Hey Zoro!" to the nearly unseen crew, who simultaneously failed into the earth. A Marine shouted to his comrade, "Here's the Straw Hat crew," and gestured toward the group that was recovering. "Don't let them escape," Zoro yelled. "Come back once you've lost them, you idiot," as Luffy turned and started to run in their direction. Luffy grinned and said, "Oh, you're all here." He pointedly ignored Zoro's shout as he approached them. An individual with white hair yelled, "Get back, men," as he rushed past the Marine cannon fodder. "Captain!" The white-haired man screamed, "You're not getting away." As his arms started to burn, he exclaimed, "Moku Moku no Hoedo Buro. Plume Plume White Blow." And a cloud of thick smoke shot out of his arms, staring at Luffy and the crew with wide eyes. However, a huge mirror that arose between them prevented the smoke cloud from getting to the Straw Hats before it could reach them. Smoker called out when he realized his attack would not pass through the mirror, and a moment later the mirror broke and appeared to vanish into thin air. He yelled, "Whoever interrupted me, show themselves now," in rage at being stopped once and the Straw Hats being taken. Despite having a frown on her face, Nami exhaled with a small smile at being saved. "Phew," she muttered to herself, "but with a mirror of everything, who could possibly stop such an attack? Nothing we had could hope to stop it." "We're saved," Usopp cried, beaming broadly, "Thank God we're saved." Since all of his blows simply went through Smoker, making the battle one-sided and not on the side he would have liked, even Luffy exhaled in relief with a slight smile. He remarked, "Whoever did that must be pretty strong." Zoro was holding a sword, prepared to fight anyone, while Sanji stood quietly smoking. Vivi had hid behind Usopp, despite the fact that he was probably more terrified. As a result of the foot shuffling, they all turned to face another path and saw a man approaching them wearing a black cloak with the hood up to conceal his face. He pointed to Nami and Vivi, who both blushed, with Nami raising an eyebrow. "I never like a guy that can willingly attack beautiful women like those two." In response, Sanji screamed, "Stop eyeing my girls," as 2 shadowy auras surrounded Vivi and Nami, with Nami being more so. "Your girls, huh?" Nami said. A crack of her knuckles revealed. "Forget about it," she yelled, slamming her fist into Sanji's head and successfully knocking the woman lover to the ground. "TCH. I'm only after the Straw Hats. His Nakama are just an extra prize now, don't get in my way again." Smoker glanced at the cloaked man, ignoring the comic act. He was about to turn back to the Straw Hat crew when the cloaked man sighed. While the others appeared equally interested and exhausted, the cloaked man appeared blurry in his movements as he moved to stand between the two groups. "Yeah, that's gonna be an issue. Y'all see, I can't let you attack Monkey D. Luffy here." He jabbed a thumb at Luffy, who blinked owlishly at the man for knowing his name and reason. "And some upstart like you isn't going to get past me to the Straw Hats." Chopper gathered the courage to ask the enigmatic but obviously powerful man, "Are you here to kill Luffy too?" As they awaited his response, Zoro used his thumb to raise one of his swords, preparing to protect his captain from Smoker or the man in the cloak. "No," the man replied humorously. "I'll explain it later, we don't have time right now." Smoker demanded of the person in the cloak, "Who do you think you are to stop me? First, I'm a marine captain, do not take me lightly." Smoker's demeanor caused the cloak man to sigh, reaching into the back of his cloak. He retrieved what appeared to be a staff and swiftly pulled it out of its confinement into the sunlight so that everyone else could gaze upon it. "Ever since those many years ago, you people haven't changed, you're still arrogant to the bones, believing you know what is right and wrong and that nothing else can be." This weapon had a crystalline appearance and was a hybrid of a trident and a G, or Chinese halberd. It had a horsehair tassel, just like the G, but it was blue instead of the customary red. The two side blades were also straight, with concave edges instead of the typical crescent blade. The weapon's end resembled a drill or corkscrew. Smoker stammered, "Impossible," when he saw the weapon. That weapon was lost decades ago along with its wielder. That's nothing but a fake, a replica." Since they initially saw fear in Smoker's eyes, the other Straw Hats were perplexed by his response to the weapon. Sanji's attention was drawn to all of them, with the exception of Zoro, who was staring at the weapon with hunger. Knowing that anything Zoro was interested in had to be significant, he asked, "What's wrong? What's the big deal about that weapon?" "That weapon is called Nejibana and it was last seen decades ago, wielded by a man known as Poseidon, the world's most wanted pirate. Both Poseidon and Nejibana vanished 32 years ago after he attacked Marineford for no reason except to kill all of the Marines and to destroy the island." Zoro went on to explain everything that he had. No one knew why he attacked. Some say he lost it, that his power finally got the best of him, but I've never believed in ridiculous rumors before, especially about a fellow swordsman. After a moment, Usopp clarified, "It's a staff." He asked himself and the others what the wording would be. He'd be a staffman. Zoro gritted his teeth and looked at Nejibana once more. "The same principle stands." "How do you know that?" "It was decades ago, so how could you know it when none of us did?" Nami inquired curiously of Zoro, with the mystery man and marine captain apparently out of sight. Every great swordsman or weapons master knows or knew of Poseidon and his great power, not to mention his mastery with Nejibana, a legendary weapon itself. Zoro responded by shrugging. Poseidon was said to be as strong as the Pirate King himself, but since that was many years before, reliable information got lost. There were only so many facts left, and just like Dracul Mahawk, it's a dream for anyone to meet and face him in battle. Even though they were still unable to see Zoro's face, the man in the cloak turned to face him and laughed as he heard what he had to say. He acknowledged that the reason people had been forgetting him was because Poseidon disappeared from the map and people's consciousness, making them think he was dead. So, even after all of these years, Nejibana and the name Poseidon live on. I thought by now the Marines would reduce both names to nothing but trash. Zoro cast a suspicious glance at the man in the cloak. Like I said, any swordsman that wishes to be great would know of Poseidon. No one really knows what made him lose it all those years ago, making him kill all those people, but to people like me that doesn't matter. As far as I'm concerned, he was a powerful swordsman. When the cloaked man glanced at the swordsman, he began to laugh, which quickly escalated into full-fledged laughter. You really should stop talking about like I'm not here," he said, grabbing his cloak and yanking it off as several eyes widened. "Besides, I don't really go by the name Poseidon anymore. I'd prefer it if you call me Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto." With his long, spiky golden hair that hung past his neckline and to his shoulder blades, Uzumaki Naruto didn't appear a day older than 20. The bangs shaded parts of his eyes, and the majority of his ears were covered. His piercing sapphire blue eyes appeared to glow from beneath his bangs, while his tan, almost bronze skin gleamed in the intense sunlight. He had 3 whisker-like marks on either side of his cheek, but they weren't very noticeable. He wore a blue sleeveless long jacket that hung down to his ankles, with white trimmings around the hem and around the edges of his chest. There was no shirt underneath, and the turquoise gem necklace had 2 tiny silver balls on either side. Additionally, he wore a long, blue hakama that reached his ankles. A long, white sash with loose ends hanging down was wrapped around his hakama, which served as a belt. In addition, he wore white sandals, a tattoo of an old man with a silvery beard and a big trident in his right hand while waves roared around him was situated at the top of his right arm. Just below his shoulder, the intricate tattoo probably symbolized his strength. He had what appeared to be a white gold ring on his left hand's ring finger. A gun holster with a molded wooden grip was located on the left side of his waist. The ostensibly elderly man, who appeared only a few years older than Zoro and Sanji, and younger than them, left everyone speechless. "Liar. You're not nearly old enough to be him," Smoker burst out, shocked by what the man had described. With a sigh, Naruto stomped Nejibana to the ground. Cracks forming underneath, he cracked his neck and shrugged his shoulder, saying, "Why would I lie? I'm Uzumaki Naruto, the Poseidon, the world's most wanted pirate. I'm 86 years old, and I'm done hiding. I may not look my age, but in this world many strange things can happen. Just ask my old friends Gold D. Roger and Whitebeard, or better yet, ask Fleet Admiral Sengoku and the Vice Admiral Monkey D. Garp. I'm sure they can prove my statement." Luffy's eyes widened even more at the mention of Garp than they had when Naruto was speaking. "You know my Gramps?" Luffy asked incredulously, as everyone, Zoro in particular, gaped at Naruto. Naruto sighed as he turned to face Luffy. "Your Gramps isn't on my Christmas card list, kid. If I ever get the chance, I'll kill him. The only reason I didn't all those years ago was because I used up too much energy fighting my way towards him and Sengoku." His face twisted briefly as he remembered, gazing at the beaten and unkempt forms of Sengoku and Monkey D. Garp. Naruto wheezed with effort. They appeared to be just as exhausted as Naruto, with their marine uniforms ripped to pieces, exposing them entirely from the waist up, numerous cuts and scars, and blood streaming freely down their bodies. Naruto was also in worse shape. He had long since lost his clothes and was only wearing a pair of hakama at this point. Not even his shoes had survived. He also had cuts, most likely more than the other two, and his face and body were covered in blood. As tidal waves tossed against the island where Marineford lived, he held Nejibana firmly in his hand. A layer of his own water lay on the ground around him, and for a considerable distance the dead bodies of all the Marines, including Vice Admirals and Admirals, who had been stationed at Marineford, would be visible if one were to look behind Naruto. The remains of Marineford lay behind the two senior Marines. Sengoku attempted to reason with him, understanding that any additional conflict would probably result in Naruto's death or more devastation. "Give up, Uzumaki Naruto, Poseidon. You aren't strong enough to best us both. Just give in now and it will all be over." They would ensure that Naruto was eliminated as well, but either Garp or he could be killed in the process. With his anger boiling inside of him and his abilities causing the water inside of him to rise above boiling point, Naruto gritted his teeth and glared at Sengoku. His mastery of the seas was demonstrated by the fact that the ocean surrounding the island started to become more ferocious. As though it was also furious, he struggled to say, "You come and attack my ship, my nakama, my home, my," and continued past them as his hold on Nejibana tightened. He yelled the final word, "And you think I just let that go?" Poseidon. Garp struggled to find the right words to say because he knew how Naruto must be feeling. Well, maybe not really, but he had an idea. He didn't want to kill a pirate crew for justice, when they hadn't done anything nefarious, but he couldn't go back in time now. Many Marines with families had lost their lives as a result of his and Sengoku's actions. He was filled only with regret and guilt. Despite their distance from one another, a stream of water was still blasted from the triple-bladed towards the two Marines as Naruto slashed with Nejibana because he didn't want to hear what he had to say. By raising their hands and using their combined Busashoku haki, Sengoku and Garp were able to either blow the attack over them or let it splash to the ground and escape through the crevices. Naruto frowned and muttered, "Looks like I'm too weak right now," before rising to his full height, which, to be honest, was not the same as Garp and Sengoku's. As water swirled around his feet, his eyes grew cold. "Looks like I gotta go, but I won't be leaving without imparting a few words." Water rose up around him and splashed to the ground, revealing nothing. "If the world government of Marines ever touches someone I care about, I promise you, I will come back and I will destroy everything you have sold your souls to," he said. The rampage would give Garp and Sengoku nightmares for years. After shaking his head at the memories, Naruto turned to face Luffy. He tilted his head to a rooftop where they all looked and saw a man sitting on the ledge, looking down at them with a smile. Specifically Naruto. "Despite my loathing for your Gramps, Luffy, I'm here to help you. You can accept my help now and I'll fight Smoker, or you can decline my help, which considering my history I can understand, and I'll let your brother fight Smoker instead." In contrast to Luffy's playful demeanor, his apparent brother appeared more serious and was somewhat taller and more muscular. He shared Luffy's shaggy black hair, but it was longer and hung down to his neck. In addition to his rather juvenile freckles, he even had a tattoo of the Whitebeard symbol. Purple bones arranged in a cross behind a purple skull with a white mustache. On his back, on his upper left bicep, he had another tattoo that read, ASCE, in a vertical font with the letter S crossed out. He wore a blue pouch belted around his left leg, black knee-length shorts with an orange belt adorned with eyelets, black boots, and nothing over his upper body. He also wore a short second belt over his right hip, the free end of which was threaded along the back of his shorts and had a big red A on the silver buckle. At his left hip hung a dagger in a green sheath. Ace had his ASCE tattooed on his left arm, along with an orange elbow guard, a red and white striped bracelet, and a log pose. He wore an orange hat with 2 blue smileys, one smiling and one frowning, and a red beaded necklace with a string of red beads hanging over the rim. A big medallion of a bull's skull with orange tassels was where 2 long orange side straps that hung down the sides of his hat met. With a laughing chuckle, Luffy's brother called down, "The old man was right, you haven't aged a day." Luffy chose to disregard Naruto's remarks regarding his gramps and exclaimed, "Ace." With a broad smile. It didn't matter whether he would survive or not. They weren't his problems, and if he ever had to, he would hope to prevent a fight between the two. Nami asked with wide eyes, "That guy is Luffy's brother?" Although they had a similar appearance, Ace seemed cooler in some ways, not because she didn't think Luffy was cool, just that he was quirky. With a head tilt, Vivi remarked, "They do look remarkably like each other." She thought that everything was crazy at the moment, with so much going on, and that the name, Poseidon, sounded significant for some reason. With star-studded eyes, Chopper exclaimed, "Whoa, he looks cool," as he always did when something appeared exciting or cool. "Luffy," Ace exclaimed, beaming broadly, "you look good since the last time we saw each other. I'm sorry, but we don't have much time to talk right now, but I will say this." He stopped and looked at Naruto. "He's not a bad guy. He might want to kill Gramps, but that doesn't make him your enemy. Plus Gramps is strong. He won't go down without one hell of a fight." Luffy's eyes widened slightly as he glanced up at Ace, then closed them and gave himself a nod. As though he was making up his mind, he sighed and turned to face Naruto. Naruto smiled, nodded, and turned to Smoker, saying, "If Ace says you're a good guy, then I'll believe him." He smiled broadly and said, "But, afterwards how about you become our nakama?" Which made Naruto freeze. Vivi and the rest of the Straw Hat Pirates let out a loud cry. Nami yelled, "Are you insane, Luffy?" as she prepared to strike the rubber man. "If he really is this Poseidon, then he's too freaking strong. He'll kill us." Zoro frowned and yelled, "Oi," at Nami. "Just cause he's stronger than you doesn't mean he'll kill us. He clearly had a reason for attacking Marineford all those years ago. It's been decades since then. Besides, we all have the same goal, or at the very least the same enemies. It makes sense to have someone strong as our nakama." "Sorry, Luffy," Naruto said softly but loudly enough for everyone to hear, and Ace's concern that Whitebeard would be correct about what he had told him was validated by the tone of his voice. "I don't truly understand why Naruto-san went on a rampage on that day, but what I do know is that he vanished a day later. From what we managed to find out, we understand he did not take his ship, the Leviathan, with him, leading to the only conclusion something grave happened to the ship and its crew. A crew that held his family and the woman he loved. It doesn't take a genius to come to the assumption that he will not allow himself to go through such pain again, even if that means cutting himself off from those who care about him." Naruto paused, then turned to face Luffy, his expression solemn at first, then gradually softening into a smile. "But I have my own mission I must do. I need to form my own crew, get a ship, and let the world know I'm back for good." At those words, Ace blinked in surprise, and then a smile came to his face. "Putting together your own crew? That one was unexpected by the elderly man. I would have preferred it if you had assisted my younger brother, but I feel like someone has already approached you about that." Luffy pouted and whined like a child, at not having a strong person like him on his ship. "Are you sure?" Naruto laughed at him because, with that hat in particular, he reminded him of Roger. "All I can do right now for you is helping you free Alabasta. I have my own job to do here also, and helping you guys will also help me in the long run, but I need my own crew. There's no two ways about it." Although she wasn't actually a member of the Straw Hats, Vivi grinned at what she had seen and hoped that Naruto's presence would help save her kingdom from Crocodile and his men, even though Nami had implied that he would kill them. The Straw Hats were equally happy with that information and disappointed that he would not be joining the crew. Before she could think, she just spoke with her mouth. Naruto was aware that he would be putting the Straw Hats in continual danger if he joined them. The best course of action at this stage would be to assemble his own crew in order to create a strong team that would be difficult to defeat. Although he had vowed never to take on a crew again due to his previous experience of losing his previous crew, he had learned to move on. It wasn't easy, of course, but he couldn't be self-centered given the changes in the world. Additionally, he needed a separate crew to assist Luffy along the way so that Luffy could develop without his constant assistance. After all, he had promised. 3 months prior, Naruto gazed in a daze at a man seated at the other end of a table. The man had spiky black hair styled in a widow's peak, a long green cloak over which he wore the white clothing of a revolutionary, and dark red tattoos on the left side of his face that looked like tribal designs. Additionally, he didn't seem to have eyebrows, but he did have a goatee, or small amount of stubble, on his chin. This was the Revolutionary Army's commander, Monkey D. Dragon. Raising an eyebrow, Naruto questioned, "You want me to do what now?" Dragon pinched the bridge of his nose and sighed. I want you to look out for my son. He left East Blue to become a pirate at last, and when people find out who he is, well, he's going to be wanted by a lot of people. You know I can't go. I'm neat here and Luffy doesn't even know about me. Naruto rested his chin on his hand and closed his eyes. He opened his eyes to check if his thoughts were correct. How could anyone know you're Luffy's dad? The only person who could know is Garp. His unasked question was simply shrugged by Dragon. Daddy dearest might have told Sengoku about Luffy's heritage, but I don't know. What I do know is that Sengoku knows who Luffy is and also who Luffy's older brother really is. At that knowledge, Naruto's brows shot upward before he let out a sigh. So you want me to look out for Luffy? I can't join his crew though. If I did, he wouldn't be able to grow into who he's supposed to be. I'd just be holding him back and making him rely on me. Dragon smiled and said, is that a yes boss? I'll do as you say. Whether he was his boss or not, Naruto simply slapped him because Dragon was still younger than him. I have nothing else to do. At the moment the revolutionary don't need me, but I will need a crew of my own, and a ship, and this little mission can be a way to tell the world that I'm not dead. He let out a sigh. I've left the world for a long time and a lot has changed. The Marines are stronger as well as the world government, and I can be more helpful out there instead of being holed up here. Given Naruto's history and his vow to never take another crew, Dragon questioned, are you sure? Naruto laughed at his companion. I'm sure. The past is the past, and while I won't ever forget what's happened, I can't let it block me from doing what needs to be done. It'll be good to see Newgate after all these years. Thanks to that young Shanks, he should know I'm still around. Dragon, who was aware that Naruto was always planning, inquired curiously, do you know who you'll choose for your crew? Naruto smiled, his eyes gleaming. Yup, it's time we called in our new revolutionaries. In fact, Dragon blinked at that. Now I'm all for crazy ideas, but are you crazy? They're young, and at the moment they're just small fry compared to anyone else. Why them? Naruto gave a shrug. I was a small fry once, so were you. So was Whitebeard. If I take these guys under my wing, then I can make them the best of the best. Of course it's their choice. Even if one of them is a relative of the Straw Hats, replied Dragon. Naruto gave a nod. Even then, if anything, they'd be able to spend time together. With a smug smile on his face, Dragon said, thank you, as sincerely as he could. Naruto gave him a sly smile. Don't be smug or I'll show you why I'm more feared than you. Dragon laughed and waved a hand toward a wall containing bounty papers, saying, ha. As far as the world is concerned, I'm more feared than you now. You aren't even counted as a valuable bounty anymore. You're practically a myth to pirates. Naruto grinned crazily. I guess we'll have to change that then, huh? Since Naruto joined the Revolutionary Army, he and Dragon have become somewhat of friends because Naruto could provide Dragon with a wealth of knowledge and power, which led to the two of them spending a lot of time together for training, planning, or simply relaxing. Even though Naruto had never anticipated making friends in the organization, he had only intended to assist and overthrow the world government. Having friends there was still pleasant, and given his present plans, he needed to make more. Naruto was distracted from his thoughts of his friend's request by Smoker's voice. You're a liar. I've read up on all dangerous pirates. If you are who you say you are, then you would be in your 80s, and according to old reports, Uzumaki Naruto was said to have eaten a devil fruit that gave him the power of manipulation over water. A Logia-type devil fruit. Waki waki no mi. The Straw Hats gave Naruto a startled look, but Luffy appeared even more thrilled by the news. Although Ace was technically his opposite, he was unable to stop his eyes from widening. He was aware that a battle with Naruto would end badly. Smoke continued in the hopes that something would expose Naruto as a phony. There was never any mention of you being able to create mirrors out of nothing though. Smoker's information made Naruto smile. You've done your homework, I'm impressed. Ace, meanwhile, had been observing Naruto with curiosity before leaping down to stand next to him. So the old man was right. You have the Logia-type devil fruit. Waki waki no mi. Though the immortality is still a mystery. That made Naruto chuckle. I take it the old man told you a lot about me then, huh? Though I don't see what reason he could accomplish from that. Ace simply smiled at him. He said, the old man got the feeling we'd meet one day, so he told me what I need to know, though I don't see the big deal in us meeting. But aside from the fact that Naruto was a legend up there with Whitebeard, he didn't see why it would matter. At that, Naruto arched an eyebrow, knowing he couldn't ignore Smoker much longer. He turned to him and said, maybe it's because this is where it all changes. The old man's gut has never been wrong before when we used to fight, so I don't doubt it now. It's been 32 years since I've truly been in the world, and since then I've had change. I haven't sat back and watched the world spin. I've been making a difference in the world. While the old information may help to recognize me, it would do no good when it comes to a fight. Although Naruto was aware that the Marines were much more powerful now after reading about the most recent admirals, Smoker warned him, I see, I'm sorry to tell you that the same goes for the Marines since your attack all those years ago, if it really is you. The Marines have become much stronger and the devil fruit helped to power us up. However, Naruto glanced back at Luffy before anything could begin. He called back to them, saying, get moving to your ship while I take care of this can of gas. We'll talk later. Luffy nodded and turned to run without hesitation. Come on guys, back to Mary. Luffy looked back as the other members of the crew nodded briefly before grabbing their shopping and bags and running. I'll expect you and Ace later. Naruto turned to Ace after Luffy and the crew had left. Like with Luffy, Ace simply nodded before leaping back and heading to the top of a building. Get back. This could messy. Now that nothing stood in his way, Naruto turned to face Smoker. I'm surprised you stayed there even knowing who you're up against. Smoker simply grunted as smoke puffed from his twin cigars. He pulled his jute from his back and reached back, saying, like I said, the Marines have changed since you last showed your face, and if I remember correctly, you had a very high bounty that I don't mind cashing in. The tip of the stick was made of kairoseki, which Smoker had used to capture Luffy by suppressing the powers of his devil fruit users. It was a major factor in Luffy's inability to combat him. Naruto smiled as he extended his left hand, which started to rapidly swirl and collect water all around it as Smokers got ready to battle someone he knew was extremely strong. Thick smoke simultaneously covered his hands. Naruto finally had enough of waiting and threw his left hand forward, hurling the collected water at Smoker in the form of a huge water blast that instantly soaked the sand and tore up the ground. Hanryu, tearing torrent. Hoeido Suppaku. White spark. Smoker's whole body transformed into a thick cloud of smoke as he took a step forward, and the huge blast of water rushed at the same speed. Boom. As they all ran through the town, Usopp yelled, get on the ship? Are we leaving the island? As she dragged a big bag, Vivi replied, no, we're going up the river on the ship, then into the desert. We only came to Nanohana to get supplies. Nami said to their captain, who was glancing back at the area they had just fled, hey Luffy, was that other person really your brother? Just as an explosion shook the ground and a tower of smoke and water rose into the sky from where they left Naruto, Luffy grinned and said, yup. He left our home island 3 years ago to go in search of One Piece. As they approached the port, Nami instructed them, anyway, we should get back on the ship already. Chopper asked, transforming into a full-fledged reindeer to carry a barrel of water on his back, what about that other guy? P. Poseidon? Zoro laughed at that and turned to watch the Tower of Elements gradually fade away. That guy wouldn't let someone like Smoker to beat him. Don't forget, he's up there with people like the Pirate King. Aw man, Luffy pouted and whimpered, and he won't join us either. Not liking to see Luffy truly look depressed, Vivi remarked, at least he'll help us though, right? Bullets flew past them as Sanji yelled, yeah sure, whatever, right now we have Marines on our asses, on them. Nami yelled, right? Get on and raise the anchor, as they approached the Going Merry. Despite the circumstances, Luffy smiled to himself, man, I never thought I'd see Ace here. Sanji shouted, get on Luffy, as he stepped onto the ship. Luffy, who remained on the port and watched the devastation where they had left Naruto, Ace, and Smoker, looked up at the Going Merry. Okay. Wait, Karoo. Vivi yelled at her big pet spot-billed duck, a swift-footed riding bird that is among the fastest ways to get around Alabasta. It was Karoo, a big yellow duck. He had black tips on his wings and tail feathers. He had a spot on his bill. As the name would suggest, he was dressed in a blue chuyo with white embroidery. He also had on blue-lensed pink goggles. In addition to all of that, he had a barrel of water around his neck with a straw protruding from it. She petted her devoted pet and said, I have an extremely important job that only you can do. As Vivi produced a letter, Karoo cocked its head to the side and asked, quack. She held the letter out to it and said, go north to Alubara and give this letter to my father. This is Crocodile and Baroque Works conspiracy. Igaram and I researched it all, everything spelled out plain and clear. And tell him I'm alive and in Alabasta, with a group of strong-willed friends. Can you do that? You have to cross the desert alone? Quack. Vivi grinned in relief, as if the duck had responded positively. Then she put the letter firmly on Karoo and said, okay. Conserve your water in the desert. Now, go tell my father that we can save this country. Karoo yelled, quack, before it took off at full speed, defying Vivi's orders and consuming its water rapidly. Conserve your water, Vivi shouted from the ship ahead. Naruto winced as the combined effect of the two attacks subsided and he observed the nearby buildings starting to collapse due to the combination of the extremely strong water slapping against them and the equally thick smoke from the smokers. However, that was the issue. He had only attacked with his water, but Smoker had transformed into his element and was now in the form of smoke. So he needed to exercise caution because Smoker was present wherever there was smoke. Smoke appeared in front of him, and he could see Smoker's head forming as the rest of his water splashed to the ground. "You underestimated me, Uzumaki." Smoker drew his jute and thrust it at Naruto's chest after partially solidifying. The force with which Smoker struck was pretty damn high, but Naruto didn't even flinch when he caught the tip of the weapon in the palm of his left hand. Just before he raised Nejibana and slashed down at Smoker, he said, "Not bad, that's some good strength on you, but it means nothing against me." The wave rushed through the streets of Nanohana, striking Smoker and washing him away. Fortunately, civilians were present, but Smoker smiled when he saw the Marines who had followed him tremble as the water smashed into them. As he touched the metal, Naruto felt a slight drain on his abilities as he looked down at the jute in his hand and spun it around. Smoker shouted from just down the road, his body now fully formed, "That weapon is tipped with sea stone. Even touching it with your bare hands the way you are should nullify your devil fruit powers and make you as weak as a kitten." He looked down at the weapon and wrapped his hand in his Busashoku haki to counteract the effects. "Sea stone, huh?" he asked, twirling the jute around again. He held it at its handle with the sharp end pointing at Smoker. "You're very well prepared to face any devil fruit user, aren't you? However, your biggest mistake was thinking this would work on me," he said. "Have it back." He threw the jute javelin style at Smoker with such force that the air itself vibrated as it flew across the distance in an instant, his strength seeming out of proportion to his size. Just as the jute pierced his shoulder and actually managed to penetrate the skin through to the other side, the Smoker was about to turn himself into smoke, but he was only partially successful because the jute was thrown too quickly and caught some of his smoke, instantly nullifying his powers and reforming him. He had never had it used against him before, but now he understood what it was like to have his skills taken away from him. It was a very powerful weapon when he used it against others as blood poured from the wound. He grunted and grasped the jute by the handle. Admittedly, it was the first time he had actually bled in a long time, and Naruto's ease of doing so seemed absurd. As he spun Nejibana around his hand, causing water to pool around the bladed end, Naruto smiled and said, "I'll admit it, Smoker, you're not half bad. But I've learned how to negate the effects of sea stone to the point that it barely bothers me." Smoker yanked his jute free and grunted, "Haki?" As he exhaled smoke from his twin cigars, he grunted, "So you do have it. It makes you just as dangerous then. I am completely and utterly outmatched. He can attack me and see what I'm going to do if he uses his haki. I know I can't defeat Poseidon because of his water-based attacks, but I won't give up until I have the Straw Hats." As he cut Nejibana, Naruto simply smiled, "Woda Suraisa." Water slicer. The water that had collected around the blade sprayed out in the shape of multiple extremely thin crescents that effortlessly sliced through the earth. However, when it got to Smoker, they simply cut him, causing parts of him to turn into smoke where they hit him behind him. The water's crescents continued, slicing through a number of buildings like a knife through butter. Fortunately, the buildings were abandoned, but it didn't help that Naruto was destroying the area. A moment later, the buildings folded in on themselves. Smoker reformed after Naruto grounded him. "I forgot how annoying it was to fight another Logia-type devil fruit user." Smoker grunted and said, "My sentiments exactly. Do you really believe you can stop me from chasing the Straw Hats?" Naruto gave a shoulder shrug. "Maybe, maybe not. You seem like a persistent guy, so I guess the only way to be sure is to kill you." At that, Smoker grinned, like a true pirate would say. Naruto's eyes narrowed. "But I don't kill for the sake of it. You Marines are just little puppets to the guys at the top. I'll admit. There are many pirates out there that do bad things, but people like the Straw Hats are not the same. They're the good guys." Simply put, Smoker stated, all pirates are the same. In the end, they're all the same. "I guess I can say the same about the Marines. Then two of your highest-ranking Marines took everything away from me, killed my friends even though we had done nothing to harm innocents or the world government." He wrapped his hand around Nejibana. "Does that mean I can say that all Marines are heartless bastards that do what they want, that just because they have power they can decide the fate of others in peace for your so-called absolute justice?" Smoker's eyes narrowed and he grunted, "No pirate is innocent, and if your friends were killed by Marines, they clearly deserved it, which is the result of anyone that becomes a pirate." After hearing enough, Naruto swiftly fled his position and materialized in front of Smoker, Nejibana already in the middle of his attack prior to Smoker being able to block or consider it. Nejibana struck him in the face with water surrounding the blades rather than passing through him. The blades connected, slicing his cheek multiple times before the water appeared to explode, knocking him off his feet and sending him straight into a building that collapsed shortly after. Before he let out a battle cry and slashed down at the debris, directing all of the collected water toward the fallen building, he leapt high into the air and spun Nejibana above his head, collecting water all around it. The moment the water made contact with the ground, it was as if a tidal wave had hit at a pillar of smoke and water rose into the sky before crashing back down with another rather large impact, and the earth shook as the powerful water struck more buildings and destroyed them. Ace, who had been forced to actually jump away from the building he had been standing on, appeared after Naruto, who knew he had to meet up with the Straw Hats, swiftly disappeared in a burst of speed. Ace gave Nejibana a nod and said, "You know, when you fight with that thing, kinda reminds me of seeing the old man fight." After laughing, Naruto poked his thumb at the area where smoke was rising from the debris. "We should go meet up with the others. This guy's relentless and we only have a short amount of time. Or I guess you have short time to speak with your brother." Ace nodded and smiled. "I guess you're right." A Marine sat smoker on some steps with twin cigars still in his mouth and said, "Thanks to him, we totally lost sight of the Straw Hat crew. What should we do, Captain?" "Someone killed Mr. 11 when we left him on the ship, too." Smoker frowned on the stairs he was sitting on, gazing at the devastation caused by the battle. After complaining, he lowered his gaze a little. "Alabasta is a large place. Let them get away and we'll never get them back, Poseidon. This is your entire fault." Who would have guessed that he was still alive? If his bounty poster is any indication, he hasn't aged since he first set sail. Notification must be sent right away to Marineford and Marine HQ. Smoker heard sandals slapping the floor as fast-paced footsteps approached him. "Smoker-san. Sorry I'm late." A woman's voice rang out. The female had dark brown eyes and dark blue hair that reached her chin. She was dressed in blue jeans, black shoes, rectangular spectacles, a blue leather coat with a furred collar and edge linings, and a dark blue short-sleeved shirt with various strange designs. She also had a sword fastened to her right side. "The Straw Hat crew is." Smoker merely glanced at the woman as she approached, demanding, "Tashigi, where hell were you?" "Sir," said another Marine, "on the other side of the town, sir." With a look of scandal and betrayal, Tashigi turned to face the spoken Marine's sergeant. Thinking of the blue-haired woman with the straw hats, Smoker asked his companion, "What do you think?" There was a Vivi among the crew. "Vivi? Princess Nefertari?" Tashigi cried out in disbelief. "Why would she be with them?" Smoker grunted, "That's what I'm thinking about." He stopped and glanced up at Tashigi. "And also, the one man in this country that I despise," he said. "You know I hate the Shichibukai, don't you?" Tashigi said, "Why, you mean Crocodile-san? But, speaking logically, he's an ally of the Marines and the world government." His eyes met Tashigi's, who gasped at the intensity. He was once an extremely clever pirate, not the type to take orders from any government. "Tashigi, always remember this. No matter how far a pirate goes, he is still a pirate." Having a good time as they sailed just down the river or Alabasta, Naruto stood at the edge of the Going Merry, leaning on the side and gazing out at the desert that surrounded them. He didn't understand why they called it a river because, given that it divided a sizable portion of the desert in two, it was essentially just a smaller ocean. In any case, it was pleasant to feel the wind as the ship traveled while looking out at essentially nothing. This was something he had overlooked. He had remained hidden and had not traveled for many years due to his own depression, which he had been gradually recovering from since enlisting in the Revolutionary Army, though even at that time he was essentially holed up in a building, helping out where he could. Though he would always remember his previous crew, he was now planning to start assembling a new crew after assisting the Straw Hats. It was simply not possible, but this time, he would be pursuing One Piece in addition to supporting the Straw Hats and watching out for Luffy. Since it had never been a concern of his, he had never bothered with it before, but now that he had been idle for so long, finding it would be enjoyable and the only way to honor Roger's passing. Though he didn't think Roger's son needed any assistance, he hoped that he would be able to watch out for him along the way, just as he had done with Dragon's son. Ace had only spoken to Luffy and the crew a few times about protecting his dimwit brother and other things when he had arrived at the ship. Ace on a little portable boat that was only useful for him and Naruto by encasing his body in a bubble of his own water and traveling down the river. Additionally, Ace gave Luffy a piece of paper that he claimed would facilitate their next meeting. The piece of paper was a Viver card, a device that would enable long-distance communication between two people. It was also used to track a person's health. If the person for whom the card was intended began to deteriorate, the card would gradually burn away. Despite how much of an honor that is to many others, Luffy simply refused Ace's invitation to join Whitebeard and his friends, which he found amusing, but Naruto could tell Luffy would always be faithful to his nakama, and Ace had just laughed because he had anticipated that response. However, since he had left, something Ace said had disturbed him. "I'm chasing a major criminal right now. He's been calling himself Blackbeard lately, but he originally used to be a member of the Whitebeard's 2nd Division. My subordinate. He committed the worst possible crime on a pirate ship, crewmate killing. He was disgusted by the thought of someone killing their nakama in order to gain power. He was aware that a meeting with Blackbeard would not go well. 5 marine ships were en route to them when Ace was departing, but Ace swiftly dispatched them with his Mera Mera no Mi, destroying the ships in a single strike. Yes, that man was quite strong." Naruto looked back and saw the ship's navigator approaching to stand next to him. "So, you're this legendary Poseidon?" he asked. The question made Naruto smile, and he continued to stare out. He arched an eyebrow at her, asking, "Let me guess, you don't believe me?" Nami leaned forward on the banister and shrugged. "I'm not sure what to believe. We saw you use water easily before we escaped, but I think no one will believe you're Poseidon when you're supposed to be near your 90s. She turned to look at him. "So how's that possible?" Naruto gave a shrug. "No idea. When I became 21 I just stopped aging altogether. I can still die obviously, but I haven't aged ever since that day. Something might have happened to me when I was a kid, but the bits and pieces of my past that I can remember don't explain how I could have stopped aging." "What can you remember?" Nami inquired, curious. Naruto shrugged and said, "I have amnesia for the first 5 years of my life. I woke up on an island, battered and beaten as if I'd been in a fight, and over time I made a life on that, made friends and so on. Maybe one day I'll remember those years, but until that day I can go on not knowing. Maybe not knowing is for the best." Nami watched him for a moment, then sighed in a loving but irritated tone. She muttered, "I don't know what to make of you, and I don't think the others do either, though Luffy's just excited he knew someone who knew the Pirate King." Instinctively happy that she was not intimidated by his presence and power Kika, as so many others had been, Naruto grinned at her. Nami grunted to him, "You think it's weird that I'm assisting you guys, a group of rookies, out of selfless generosity? How about I told you that I made a promise to look out for Luffy? How about I told you that by helping you guys I can make allies, or helping you guys to save the country can also help me to bring life back to Alabasta?" Nami narrowed her eyes after giving him a startled look. "I think I can believe you on the first 2, since Luffy will ally himself with you no matter what. How can you bring life back to here when most of it is destroyed?" Water instantly gathered out of the air as Naruto held up his hand while laughing. With a flick of his wrist, the water appeared to sink into his skin, and Nami stared at him in amazement and wonder that someone could and would do something so voluntarily. "I can manipulate, create, and become water at will. This kingdom is in a very bad draft. What do you think they would do if I gave them back their water? Filled their rivers back up, filled their ponds, ocean, farms, and oases? They would rebuild what they'd lost. My water can give this kingdom its hope back." They were both startled when a breathless, ragged voice asked, "You'd do that?" from behind them. When they turned around, they saw Vivi standing there with a quivering lip and tears in her eyes, while the rest of the crew stood around smiling from having listened, and Zoro, however, appeared smug that he was right about being a good guy, and Chopper and Usopp hugged with tears in their eyes at what they called a selfless act. Naruto nodded and grinned at Vivi. "I would do it. I used to help your father rout many years ago whenever he had trouble with gathering the needed water to keep your kingdom growing in a way. This is partially my fault for leaving the world out of my own selfish needs. Helping you and your father is the least I can do." With more hope that her home would be revived, Vivi sniffed before launching herself at Naruto and putting her hands around him. She was crying and laughing at the same time. "Thank you." With a laugh, Naruto put his hand on her head and combed her hair back in a reassuring motion. While Nami slapped her forehead in frustration, Luffy smiled as he practically stomped over to him and pointed his finger in Naruto's face, causing the blonde to blink owlishly at him. He declared, flagrantly disregarding the strength gap, "And when we do beat Crocodile's ass and lose Smokey, we will fight to see who's stronger," as everyone gaped. Nami moaned before approaching Luffy and grabbing his ear, causing the rubber man to yell in pain as she pulled him away, however, not before grinning at Naruto as though he had validated something for her. "Come on, rubber guy, the sooner you eat the sooner you sleep." "Food. We made it," Luffy cried, grinning broadly as he shielded his eyes from the sun with his hand and gazed out into the distance. He was forced to wear a red cloak by Vivi to shield him from the harsh sun's rays now that they were in the open desert. In fact, everyone was wearing some kind of cloak or robe. Wait a minute, there's nothing here. In that regard, Luffy was correct. By the looks of things, the town had been abandoned entirely, and it didn't take a genius to figure out why, since all of the buildings had been buried or partially covered by the desert. But the town didn't seem big enough for Yuba, so either the desert had covered more buildings or... After protecting his own eyes from the sun, Naruto questioned, "This isn't Yuba, is it?" Additionally, he had put his cloak back on because, as a waterman, the sun had a greater effect on him. The heat and dryness would have made him much weaker, so he was just relieved that he didn't have to drink water to use his powers. With his shoulders slumping in utter disappointment, Luffy grumbled, "It isn't?" After giggling at Luffy's antics, Vivi nodded in response to Naruto's query. "No, it isn't. We still have to walk northwest through the desert for half a day." "Half a day?" Usopp said, looking disbelievingly. Vivi pointed to their current location, which was quite a distance from Yuba, and said, "Look at the map." She held up a map to illustrate her point. "We crossed the Sandora River and we just landed here at Aramalu, the Green Town." "Green Town?" Luffy asked, frowning as he surveyed the area. "But there's nothing green around here." "No, not anymore," Vivi exclaimed as though it were insignificant, but given everything she had been through thus far, it's unlikely that anything would catch her off guard. Up until recently, this town was a lively place, full of green plants. However, in the past 3 years not a single drop of rain has fallen in the entire country. The rubberman had retrieved a skull from the sands, and Chopper turned his head away from Luffy. His eyes a little frightened, he asked Vivi, "Is that port town going to be okay?" "Nanohana gets its water supply from the oasis at Kotoria, so they're safe," she reassured him. "Even in Alabasta, no rainfall has never been something to worry about for thousands of years, but there was always one place that got more rain than anywhere else: the capital city. Alubara, the city built around the king's palace. People called it the king's miracle. At least they did until that day, the day that dance powder was discovered." Nami asked Vivi to confirm. "Dance powder?" "Yes." Luffy said, "Hey, do you know what that is?" to his navigator. Nami gave a nod. "It's also known as powder that calls Ron." With an eyebrow raised, Luffy asked, "Powder that calls rain?" Nami clarified, "It was created by some country with no rain, long ago. The powder emits a mist like smoke that rises up into the air. It speeds up the creation of ice particles in sub-freezing temperature clouds and causes rainfall." Naruto continued, looking at Luffy with a deadpan expression. "Basically it's powder that makes artificial rain, like the name points out." Luffy said, "Aha, so it's mystery powder." Naruto closed his eyes. Nami slapped her forehead, and the others just stared at Luffy as though he were unique. Zoro said bluntly to Luffy, "It makes it rain." Luffy simply grinned broadly. "Dragon. How is this guy your son?" As he squeezed the bridge of his nose, Naruto thought Luffy was simply foolish, but he was a decent enough man. It was difficult to think that someone like Dragon was related to someone like him. "Huh? So that would make it perfect for this place, right?" Usopp responded. With a look of growing sadness, Viva remarked, "At first, yes, the people who created it called it dance powder because it made them dance with joy, but there was a large pitfall to all this." Nami became alert now. "It caused droughts to countries downwind. Artificial rain is the process of nurturing clouds that aren't ready to rain yet. It sucks the water out of clouds." With a somber expression, Usopp added, "I see, it steals rain from clouds that would mature over neighboring countries." While Naruto simply gazed out to what used to be a bustling village, Vivi nodded in agreement with what they were saying. "Yes, and it started a huge war. The loss of life was profound since then. The world governments have outlawed the manufacturing and possession of dance powder worldwide, a powder that brings happiness and misery at the same time." That large shipment of dance powder appeared in Nanohana soon afterward. An abnormal weather pattern started and no rain fell anywhere except for where the king was. Zoro noted, "It's normal to distrust the king. They must have thought he was using the powder to steal all of the rain." Naruto turned to them all and remarked, "Crocodile's smart." He frowned and wondered what Crocodile's motivation was in all of this. He set up everything from the very start. A rebellion came to life as towns dried up, people starved, and just like he wanted the people to rebel against an innocent country causing useless bloodshed. With tears in her eyes, Vivi nodded. "The peace of the kingdom, the faith in the royal family, and the rain were all taken, and it was all due to one man, Crocodile. I will never, ever, let him get away with this," she cried out, clenching her teeth. After signing, Naruto approached Vivi and put his hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry, he'll get what's coming to him, I promise." The Yuba, just as nightfall was approaching, they finally reached the oasis town, but upon arrival, they encountered a fierce sandstorm that ripped the town to pieces and buried the majority of the buildings. Soon after, they discovered a lone man who had remained behind while the townspeople and rebels went elsewhere. The man, who went by Mr. Toto, had known Vivi since she was a young child. Despite being a weak old man, he had been in the middle of the town, digging through the sand to reach the oasis. It strengthened Naruto's resolve to use his devil fruit abilities to bring water to the parched nation in order to save it. Hopefully, Luffy would defeat Crocodile without having to intervene in any way. bringing him one step closer to his own objective of assembling his crew. In addition, it would weaken the Shichibukai, who were already at a disadvantage due to Crocodile's immense strength. However, because of the desert's rapidly declining climate, they were all currently lodging in an abandoned inn because it was well past midnight and freezing outside. However, Naruto was sitting on a balcony on the second floor of the inn, which at this point was on the same level as the sand. Rather than sleeping like the others, he was looking at Luffy, however, as he assisted Mr. Toto in searching for water in the Seine. Water instantly engulfed his right hand as he raised it, then moved to form a ball on his palm. This town might be saved by the amount of water that comes from this. Naturally, the populace must be present and not outside opposing the king. Crocodile has done a fantastic job literally turning this place upside down, but I have a feeling that tomorrow won't be a good day for the others. He looked back down at the orb of water in his hand, which slowly began to take on the shape of a person before the water became more defined, giving the person a feminine appearance. I can't involve myself with their fights, unless their lives are in danger. On the palm of his hand, a woman's figure stood, dressed in what appeared to be a skirt, with one side extending past her ankle and the other down to her knee. A revolver-like gun was in a gun holster on the left side of her leg. The figure's hair was down to her neck with spikes at the end, and she had wide eyes and what appeared to be a smile on her face. She also wore a t-shirt with a jumper that looked hooded over it, but nothing particularly noticeable because it was only made of water. The gentle voice interrupted his thoughts and focus, causing the water to disintegrate and seep into his skin. Who is that? He tipped his head back to see who would speak, and Vivi was standing there, clearly roused from her slumber. Rubbing her right eye, he shook his head, looking back down at the location of the figure as she appeared to be prepared to ask another question. He looked back up at her and said, "It's nothing. Just someone from my past. I take it you couldn't sleep." Vivi nodded. Noticing he didn't want to talk about the woman, she gestured to the outside, where the sand had risen to partially engulf the buildings, saying, "I couldn't stop thinking about all of this." She sat next to him, her legs hanging over the balcony bars as she gripped the bars, and he said softly, "I told you before, we'll save your home." She smiled as she reflected on her new friends and said, "I know you did, and thank you. You have no obligation to be here, and neither do the Straw Hats." Naruto looked down at Luffy, who was still digging, and laughed. "You're wrong, we all have an obligation to be here. The simple fact that this place needs help is all the reason they need." He trailed off, and Viva glanced at him. "What about you?" Naruto smiled and said, "Me? I'm here to help an old friend, your father, though I wouldn't sit back while a princess is in need of help, of course. I've never helped a princess before actually," he muttered with a grin. "But I did save a queen once. Ah, good times." Vivi gave him a long look before bursting into laughter. "I still find it hard to believe that you're over 80 years old. You don't even act like it, and yet you're powerful, or so I'm told," she said with a grin. "What's it like to never age?" After giving her a quick glance, Naruto scowled. "It's a curse being forced to stand still in time while everything and everyone passes by, but I guess there's a good side to it too. I can make a difference in the world and see it all through in the end. It just matters how I use my immortality. Whining about it will do nothing, so why not just change the world to be a better place?" He smiled at her. Vivi grinned at the sound. "So Luffy wants to be Pirate King and you want change the world? It's a good thing you two know each other, and Luffy practically worships the ground you're on." She was correct. Luffy had wanted to fight Naruto to see how strong he was ever since learning about his identity and his past friendship and rivalry with Roger. However, Naruto would not accept any challenge until he witnessed a change in Luffy's strength. He knew he was much stronger than Luffy, but he didn't boast about it because of his good fortune. He wasn't on par with Whitebeard, Roger, Shanks, and a few others. He had trained hard to earn his position in the world, and it didn't hurt to take on formidable foes and a formidable crew. Luffy also needed those items, and he was en route with them. Naruto gave a shoulder shrug. "Until I form my own crew and get my own ship, then I won't be doing much of anything, but when I do, Luffy won't be the only one aiming for One Piece." Vivi gave him a startled look. "You're going for One Piece?" Naruto gave a nod. It also helped him to keep an eye on Luffy if they shared the same objective. "Going for One Piece will also take me on a great journey all over the Grand Line, where I'll be able to make differences in the world, plus I need to have something to do now." Vivi nodded understandingly and giggled. She asked, glancing back over the town covered in sand, "Can't you use your water or something to help them down there?" Naruto frowned as he glanced down at the two individuals excavating. "If I use my powers now, it would raise suspicions as to why water suddenly appeared. It would cause too much of scene and raise questions. We should just do what we're doing and take everything at a steady pace. Crocodile is smart. He still has the Baroque works under his thumb, and if we antagonize them now, there's no telling what they'll do. Don't forget, there are still a lot of people out there that Crocodile can attack to send a message." Too exhausted to give a damn at the moment, Vivi sighed and rested her head on his shoulder. I guess you're right. Naruto grinned slightly as he glanced down at the young teen. I won't let you lose your house, Vivi, I swear. The following day, despite having only joined the group the day before, Naruto was blending in quite nicely. He got along well with Zoro because, although he was a little awkward and lethargic, he was very observant and liked swords and other weapons, which he also enjoyed, though he mostly used his Nejibana and the revolver he carried at his left side, although Usopp seemed to be a very good marksman, which would be very helpful in the future, especially if he got over his cowardice. He was more of a comic relief for the group, giving them some humor. In addition to being attractive, Nami was a pleasant person to be around and converse with. Since she was also responsible for keeping the group grounded and serving as their navigator, she was far from useless, especially considering that she fought with an odd pole. Actually, Chopper was the only one that Naruto thought was strange. He was unable to determine whether the reindeer was a doctor or a mascot. He had heard that Chopper had eaten a devil fruit while he was a reindeer and had changed into a hybrid, but it was more than a little strange to watch him change forms as if it were nothing out of the ordinary. His medical skills were amazing, particularly since he created an ointment to treat the sunburn they had been suffering from, which healed them in an hour. Naruto knew Chopper was strong and would only get stronger. Naturally, he was well aware of Luffy's character. Despite his ignorance, he was intelligent and determined to accomplish anything according to what he had heard and been told. Luffy was also fearless, which was admirable given the people he would be facing in the future. It was unfortunate that he would be departing from them so soon. Luffy abruptly said, I quit, and leaned back against a tree. Everyone halted their journey across the vast desert to gaze at Luffy in complete astonishment. Naruto was equally astounded by Luffy's words, but he remained silent to observe the outcome of the situation. After Mr. Toto gave Luffy some water, they eventually dug up the ground after walking from Yuba for several hours. Perhaps wearing a black cloak didn't help, but if Naruto was being honest with himself, the sun's heat was having some effect on him, not his abilities or his body, just the searing heat that seemed to just get past his cloak. Luffy? Nami asked, frowning anxiously with a tone of boredom. Zoro questioned, what's going on? All Luffy could do was stare at them gravely. I want to beat the crap out of Crocodile. Vivi appeared both pleased and concerned. If we stop the guys who are rebelling, will we stop Crocodile? We can't do anything even if we go to this place where pirates. You'd be better off without us. All eyes were fixed on Luffy, concerned by his words. Nami wanted to support her new friend with a curious sparkle in his eyes. Zoro gazed at Luffy, wondering where he was taking his speech. Chopper appeared to be thinking similarly, though it was difficult to tell because he was in his reindeer form. Sanji deadpanned, sometimes he hits the bull's eye without even thinking. Usopp gave a nod of agreement. That's Luffy for you. Wait, was Vivi's attempt to communicate her fear that he was not assisting? You just don't want anyone to die in this war. The people of your country, or us, or anyone. You're talking about a fight against one of the Shichibukai, in which over 1 million people will be in battle, and all you want is for no one to die. Luffy's gaze settled on Vivi's steady, but that's naive. Nami yelled at Luffy, stop, Luffy, can't you think of Vivi's feelings? To stop her, Sanji extended a hand in front of her. Wait, Nami-san. But what's wrong with that? Luffy was asked by Vivi. What's wrong about not wanting people to die? It appeared that Luffy wasn't a total moron after all, as he said, people die, with more seriousness than Naruto had ever seen him. But before Luffy had a chance to respond, Vivi had strode over to him and punched him hard, knocking him off the tree. UBFH. Angrily, Vivi screamed, stop talking like that. For the world. Don't you dare say that again. That's what we're trying to stop. You can't blame the rebels or the army for this. Why should anyone die? This is all Crocodile's fault. The princess gritted her teeth as her face throbbed with pain after Luffy reacted exactly like Vivi did and punched her across the face. Then why are you risking your life? Knowing that things were getting out of hand, Usopp took the initiative. That's going too far, Luffy. But when Sanji watched Vivi get knocked back, he appeared to have just suffered a heart attack. Damn it, Luffy. As she dove at Luffy, tackling him to the ground and punching him in the face, Vivi yelled, what? In response to what he had said to her. As she attempted to strangle him, Luffy yelled up to her, even I can tell what this country needs the most, just by looking at the situation. It appeared to Naruto that this was a humorous situation. You think risking one life is enough? With tears threatening to spill from her eyes, Vivi screamed, then what am I supposed to do? She said, there's nothing left I have to say, as she started to feel exhausted from punching Luffy. She held a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face as Luffy screamed at her, Why don't you try risking our lives, too? I thought we were friends. Luffy sat directly in front of the princess and calmed down. He sighed as Vivi pulled her hood over her head to hide her tears, saying, "Look at you. You're crying? You're the one who wants to kill him the most. Tell me where Crocodile is." Naruto questioned the two people who were panting heavily on the ground, combining exhaustion, the sun, and their emotional high. "Are you two done now?" he asked while everyone stared at Naruto, who had appeared by the two. They both looked up at him with weary expressions. Since they were old enough to handle their own issues and some things simply had to be said regardless, he hadn't said anything the entire time. "Good." He raised his hand and extended two fingers, which collected tiny water droplets above them. Both of their orbs shot upward with a flick of both fingers, making them appear to burst with more water than they actually held. Luffy and Vivi were soaked to the bone by two different torrents of water that landed on them, causing their clothing to stick to their skin and, in Vivi's case, flaunt her curves, which resulted in nosebleeds that blew Sanji back. Though grateful for the water's ability to cool her, Vivi attempted to conceal her more noticeable chest. She gritted her teeth and said, "A little warning next, please," to a smirking Naruto. Fortunately, his water wasn't seawater, so even though Luffy was splashed with an equal amount of water, he didn't feel weaker. In fact, the cooling water made him feel better. Luffy made Naruto's crew take the blame when he said, "Ah, you sure you can't become our nakama? You can come in handy when we need to cool down." Luffy was thrown face first into the sand after Nami stomped over to him and kicked him in the head. She pinched the bridge of her nose, something Naruto had observed she did whenever she was upset and attempting to relax. "You can't use someone just cool you down, you idiot," she exclaimed. "Why did you soak them?" Naruto shrugged. After laughing at their performance, he turned to face Vivi and knelt down, putting his face in front of her. "They were exhausted and the water can help to cool them down. Come on, Crocodile isn't going to just wait for us and I'm sure he knows you guys are here." Zoro smiled and said, "So we're going for Crocodile then?" Naruto nodded and assisted Vivi in standing up. "Yes, he's in a town called Rainbase, straight to the north of Yuba. From what I've discovered, his main base of operations is the Rain Dinners, a casino." Nami's eyes were more like belly signs than stars, but she asked, "Casino?" Vivi frowned and asked Naruto, "How do you know this?" Naruto gave a shrug. "I've not been doing nothing. Whilst I wasn't out in the open, I've been gathering information from all over the place, and Crocodiles was the one that stood out the most considering he's a Shichibukai." Luffy got up to look at Naruto and said, "So we're going to this Rainbase place?" They were all perplexed when he said, "Yes, though I'll be meeting you there." Chopper asked, tilting its head to fit its current shape, "What do you mean?" The now found clone grinned and said, "I'm a Mizu Bunshin that or rather, my original left behind last night while he went to Rainbase. He knew you'd be heading there eventually and went to scout out the place. I don't need to remind you that we're not a part of your crew, we're just helping you guys out." Nami questioned incredulously, "So this entire time you've not really been here?" Before his body splashed to the ground, he said, "No, not really, not since last night anyway. Anyway, my time's up right now, so you'll have to make it to Rainbase without me." Before Luffy started to smile broadly, they all just gazed down at the now soaked patch of sand. "That was awesome," he exclaimed, laughing aloud. After grinning at his antics, Vivi turned to face everyone. "Naruto-san is right. He isn't a part of you guys, so he doesn't really have to stink with us. Him going on ahead is a great advantage, and since no one knows he's with us, then he can't be associated with us. If he does something, this could be very helpful." She pulled out her map and everyone nodded with agreement. "Okay, here is Rainbase." Rainbase. Dream City. Naruto was lounging at a table in a casino with a bottle of sake while the Straw Hats were traveling across a desert with little food, little water, and the sun shining down on them. The casino was also well built because it kept out too much heat and even had air conditioning, which made it feel cool and served as a sort of escape from the outside world while also keeping patrons interested in gambling. As he surveyed the spacious casino, he realized that gambling was not the reason he was there. He was aware that there were still some living members of the Baroque works, probably in this exact building, and that the sooner he located them, the better. Finding the enemy first was always beneficial, even though he might not be fighting them because he would let the Straw Hats do that. However, he was also trying to find one of the Baroque works individuals he had met a few years prior. He started thinking about his plans while swirling his sake in its bottle and taking a sip. "If Luffy defeats Crocodile, which will be difficult but doable, I might be able to win Crocodile over to my cause by promising to protect him from the Marines, who will be pursuing him, and, hopefully, he won't be strong enough to resist. I have nothing to lose, but he won't be easily persuaded. Then, I have to travel to Konomi Islands for the revolutionary's new recruit. She seems promising in terms of navigation, which I also need, and based on what I've heard, her marksmanship is superb. With my assistance, I can help her become stronger after that. I need to locate my doctor, which shouldn't be too difficult, and then I need to bolster my crew. He felt the big seat he was sitting in on shift with some extra weight to his right, which snapped him out of his reverie. A quiet voice said, well, if it isn't the infamous Poseidon, to what do I owe the pleasure? A tall, athletic, slender woman with shoulder-length black hair caught Naruto's attention as he looked to his right. She had a very distinctively simple nose and blue eyes with dark, wide pupils. She was tall overall with a narrow waist and somewhat long limbs, particularly her legs. She is regarded by many as a beautiful woman. She wore a skimpy cowgirl ensemble that included a white fur-lined coat, white cowboy hat, and white high-heeled boots, as well as a purple cleavage-exposing top and matching miniskirt with white ornaments hanging from them. He said, "Nico Robin," and then grinned at her. "Or should I call you Miss All Sunday?" Nico Robin pressed her hand against her cheek. "That's up you. I don't really have a preference for either." At last, Naruto turned to look at her, grinning. "It's certainly been a while, hasn't it?" Nico Robin gave a headshake. She shook her head, but her smile persisted. "Trust you to act so callous in the enemy's stronghold. When we met 3 years ago, you spoke of this revolutionary army. Why did you offer me a place with them when you know I betray the trust of everyone I work with?" Naruto laughed. "Because everyone, even those who have lost the ability to trust, deserve to have nakama that will stand by them at all times." Nico Robin merely gave a little giggle. Her eyes appeared to darken as she shook her head, asking, "And you think this group of yours could offer me such a thing?" "Such a thing doesn't exist in the end. Humans will always betray others one way or another." When she gave him the obvious response, Naruto sighed to himself. "You can keep telling yourself that if it helps you sleep at night, but I'm not here to talk to you about joining me." That caught her eye. "Tell me everything about Crocodile, the Baroque works and his plan." At that, Robin leaned back in her chair and arched an eyebrow. "And why should I betray my partner and boss?" Naruto simply took a gulp of his sake and shrugged indifferently. "Oh, that's the stuff anyway. No matter how you look at it, you'll betray Crocodile when you find the poneglyph here, so before that happens I may as well pick at that impressive mind hidden in that pretty head of yours for some information that could help my friends." At his words, Robin's eyes widened in surprise. Before she collected herself, she shook her head, laughing at her own question. "You know of the poneglyph?" "Of course you do. What don't you know?" "Let's say I do tell you. How could it benefit you?" "I know you most likely have the power to take down Crocodile, so why not finish him yourself?" The black-haired woman shook his head at Naruto. "Because there are times when you must let others finish what they've started." After giving him a long look, Robin chuckled quietly. "You mean Straw Hat Luffy? You believe he can defeat Crocodile all by himself? I once heard that Poseidon was one of the greatest pirates out there, but it looks like you've fallen if you're relying on a rookie to defeat a member of the Shichibukai." Naruto grinned at almost nothing at all. "Maybe over the years I have fallen somewhat, but every great pirate or person must fight their own battles without others fighting them for them. If you believe Luffy cannot defeat Crocodile, then that's your opinion, but I have faith in him and his nakama to complete their mission." After a moment of staring at him, Robin sighed to herself. "I suppose arguing with someone like you is a waste of time. One more question. What will you do with me once I tell you what you want to know?" She was clearly putting herself out there even though she didn't trust him or anyone else, as Naruto could see by the fact that her defenses were up. "I will do nothing. You tell me what I want to know and I'll leave you as if I was never here in the first place." Nico Robin could honestly say that by simply being an honest man, he was getting past her defenses as she gazed at the mysterious figure of Uzumaki Naruto. He was a man with so much at his disposal that he didn't need anyone by his side, and that was what most enraged and perplexed her. And yet, if Princess Vivi had to guess, he was prepared to assist the Straw Hats simply because he wanted them to finish their mission with her. After her time with the group, she could honestly say that she was happy with Naruto's attack on Marineford 32 years prior, which was one of the few things she knew about him. He then disappeared from the world, but she was among the few who knew that, if Naruto was telling the truth, he had returned less than 10 years prior by joining a group that seemed to want her. She obviously didn't agree because of her troubled past, especially since she knew that if she betrayed them as she usually did, she might not really get away like she had all the other times she had betrayed someone. She could have all of the things Naruto mentioned if only the world were much simpler. However, the world was undoubtedly a dirty place, and you had to do whatever it took to survive, even if it meant betraying your current employer. Very well. Crocodile's plan, known as Operation Utopia, called for overthrowing King Nefertari Cobra and capturing the ancient weapon Pluton, which was concealed in Alabasta, in order to seize control of the Alabasta kingdom. Given that Crocodile had succeeded in inciting the nation against itself, the plan was impressive. Of course, that was only because, during Crocodile's performance of them all, nobody had any idea what was happening. He had been given a basic explanation by Nico Robin of how Crocodile had arrived at his current position. Getting information from her was surprisingly simple. She essentially told him everything she knew without any preamble. She had told him he owed her when they had left, which only made him laugh because she had inadvertently hinted that they would cross paths again. All he could hope for was that she would find Nakama, ideally the Straw Hats. In any case, Crocodile's detailed plan was as follows. Step 1. By capturing other pirates, Crocodile became a hero to the people and gained their affection through public appearances as one of the Shichibukai. Because of this, nobody was able to suspect that he was the driving force behind everything. Step 2. Dance powder was secretly used by Baroque works to create unusually heavy rainfall in the capital city until it was observed that other cities were receiving rainfall that was below average. The public had no suspicions. Step 3. Dance powder was brought into the nation by Baroque works agents, who claimed it was a delivery for the king when questioned. Step 4. To help smuggle dance powder into the palace, Baroque works assigned a number of its members to join the royal guard. The discovery of the powder led the populace to believe that their king was responsible for the absence of rain at this point. Ideas of rebellion were starting to emerge among Yuba's youth. Step 5. A number of Baroque works members joined their ranks to ensure the rebellion was advanced. Some even went so far as to become close officers to Koza, Vivi's childhood friend who had taken on the role of their leader. Although those plans were now useless to him, they did provide some understanding of how Crocodile had reached this point. Those 5 steps had already passed, but even though Robin was the vice president of Baroque Works, she didn't really know, so she hadn't been able to tell him much more. However, she had informed him that, in keeping with Crocodile's style, he would probably have the royal family and rebels duped into fighting one another. He had been informed about the plan, Crocodile, and the Baroque Works, but he was powerless to stop the Straw Hats from handling the important matters without getting in the way. He was only able to observe, but he wouldn't do nothing if they needed his assistance. 1 hour until Operation Utopia. As they sat in what appeared to be a tiny cafe, Tashigi asked her superior officer, Smoker-san, why Rainbase? Although the 2 Marines were not yet aware of it, a certain Straw Hat Luffy yelled, "We can drink water now, Usopp," as he entered the same cafe. "Wah duh," Usopp cried, gasping for air and staring around him in despair. "I just feel it," Smoker sighed, his customary twin cigars still in his mouth. He concluded in a mysterious and ominous manner, "Something smells in this country. I feel a huge shadow behind all of this. Give US water lady, barrels, 5 barrels of water." Tashigi frowned as she turned to face her commander. "But are you sure it's Crocodile and his organization?" "Water." Smoker looked to his right, where a certain pair was sipping from 2 large barrels, and he admitted, "I can't say I'm sure," but his eyes remained narrowed. "We can't find any connection between the Straw Hat crew and the princess either. All we can do is wait until something starts to happen." Great water, damn it," Luffy said, setting his barrel down behind him. "Yeah, damn it," Usopp said, pointing to Luffy after doing the same with his barrel. Looking over Luffy's shoulder, Usopp saw Smoker and Tashigi staring back at them. "Okay, let's bring the rest of the water to them," he trailed off. "Shit." As Naruto rose from the roof above him, he thought to himself, "The Straw Hats are finally here and they've got the Marines back on their ass." They ran into Smoker again. Seriously, how have they survived this long? A perfect clone of Naruto appeared next to him after a tendril of water that had broken off from his body splashed onto the ground and started to grow upward. Naruto smiled and poked a finger at the group, saying, "Mizu Bunshin, one of my favorite techniques, though it's much better when I have a large source of water. They'll likely split up. Watch over Vivi, she isn't a fighting type and Baroque Works will be after her." Clone Naruto saluted briefly. "Got it, boss." After the clone leapt away, Naruto smiled and returned his focus to the group, focusing on Luffy. "Let's see what you can do." Despite the confusion, Sanji spoke up as the group arrived at rain dinners. "This isn't good, we should split up." Everyone gave a nod of agreement. Luffy exclaimed, "Then we'll all meet back up at Crocodile's." Before using his powers to launch himself into the air and yanking his eyelid at Smoker, "Come and get me, Smokey. Don't think you're getting away this time. Hoedo Bane, White Vine." Smoker used his own Moku Moku no Mi powers to launch himself into the air. He then wrapped his smoky appendage around the mid-air Luffy's body and held him in place, painfully confining him. However, Luffy knew how to escape and quickly took a breath through his mouth when Luffy yelled, "Gomu Gomu no Fusen. Gum Gum Balloon." His body immediately grew larger and released Smoker's hold, wrenching them both violently apart as he crashed into a camel pen and fled the scene. Nami gestured ahead as she and Usopp ran through the streets together. She exclaimed in surprise and astonishment, "Look, there's the entrance to rain dinners. It's built in the middle of a lake." As they ran, Usopp glanced around anxiously. No one else is here yet? A few employees of the Baroque works quickly noticed them running from ahead. Take aim and fire. Those two are the first two. When Usopp and Nami saw the men brandishing rifles at them, they became alarmed. However, before they could react, a figure in a black cloak descended between them, and the two Straw Hats recognized him right away because of the amazing trident-like weapon on his back. But rather than doing so, the man they knew as Uzumaki Naruto produced his weapon, the Blue Rose, by reaching under his cloak to his left. With its over and under barrel design, Blue Rose was a special kind of revolver that could fire 2 magnum rounds with every pull of the trigger. Despite having a conventional 6-shot cylinder instead of the M500's 5-shot cylinder, the Blue Rose appeared to be a heavily modified Smith & Wesson Model 500 double-action revolver. Target sights, porting on each barrel to lessen recoil and muzzle flip, a 6-shot cylinder instead of a 5-shot, and the evident extra barrel that allowed for a double shot were additional modifications made to the gun because Naruto would shoot with his left hand. The cylinder had also been altered to release on the right to reload instead of the customary left. Additionally, the gun featured a molded wooden grip and a detailed carved rose design. However, if one were to look closely, they would see no bullets or shells lying around, just holes in the people's chest with some liquid around the edges before Nami or Usopp could blink. Naruto had already taken aim and fired upon the unfortunate soldiers who cried out in agony as they each received 2 bullets to the chest that actually caved their ribs in from the force. A clever but extremely difficult strategy, using water and hockey as bullets. He turned to face them while holstering his gun, and Nami grinned at him, asking, "So you made it after all, Naruto-kun?" He lifted his head to show them, smiling, "Oh, I get a kun now?" Water wrapped around his body before he disappeared, saying, "This is all I can do now without raising too much alarm. It's all up to you guys." Nami smiled, not embarrassed to admit it, as Usopp chuckled uneasily, hinting at how easily and swiftly Naruto had dispatched the Baroque workers. "I gotta admit, he's growing on me." Usopp wasn't certain who he was attempting to persuade more. "Why yeah, not scary whatsoever." Nami was about to respond when Zoro rushed up to them, scanning the area for the fallen members of the Baroque works as he observed the blood accumulating around them. He questioned, "Whoa, what happened here?" "Zoro!" shouted Nami angrily, "weren't you with Vivi?" Their swordsman frowned in confusion and said, "Yeah, I let her go ahead. Isn't she here yet? She might be inside already." With a resolute expression on her face, Nami stated, "Then we have to hurry. I don't know why, but it seems like Naruto-kun is testing us by putting our trust in us to defeat Baroque works and Crocodile. We must stop Crocodile in any case." Luffy screamed, "Ah," and dashed in their direction. "Luffy!" Usopp exclaimed with a sigh of relief. Smoker was right behind him the whole time, saying, "Moku Moku's chasing me. Let's go everybody." He shouted, "Run inside, run. Just you wait, Crocodile," as Zoro, Usopp, and Nami started to follow him. The vice president was asked by Crocodile, "Vivi and the pirates are in this town?" Nico Robin gave him a smile. "Yes, I've just got word from the millions." Excited to see what the pirates had in store, Crocodile grinned broadly and commanded, "Ha ha 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 ha. Bring those insignificant rats in to see me." Robin said, "Sure, if you trusted the right person. Let's see Uzumaki Naruto." "Dinner's in the rain," Luffy yelled at the top of his lungs. "Crocodile, get your ass down here, come on." Nami gave Luffy a frustrated, irate slap on the back of the head. "How is that going to get him to come out, you dumbass? He's the hero of this country. Do you want to make the customers of this place to be your enemies too?" Luffy yelled, "Fine," in such frustration that Nami developed a tick mark. "So, what do we do?" "Hey, wait a minute," Usopp said, his face set in alarm. "Without Vivi, we don't know who Crocodile is." Before the 3 of them whirled around with their arms raised, Nami questioned, "Where is Vivi anyway?" The 3 of them shouted, "Vivi, Crocodile." Nami herself disregarded her own counsel. Behind them stood Zoro, who had been forgotten, looking deadpan. "Oh." One of the casino staff approached a man wearing a suit. "Assistant manager, some strange people are here." The worker was scowled at by the assistant manager. "Tell security to get rid of them, don't let them cause a ruckus." Smoker charged in and kicked open the casino doors before anything else could be done. "I've got you now, Straw Hat," he said, dismissing those attempting to hold him back and continuing on in Luffy's direction. "This place is on a lake. There's nowhere for you to go now." Just before running around the casino and knocking down the security guards who had been sent out to escort him out, Luffy muttered, "Crap, not again." As Luffy ran around laughingly, Nico Robin gave the order, Bring them into the VIP room, she went on, observing the assistant manager hesitating. Crocodile's orders. Usopp shouted to the crew, "Hey, look at that," and they all paused to watch a red carpet emerge from the VIP room, with multiple attendants bowing and pointing to the door from the carpet's edges. "Right this way please, this is the VIP room." Nami gave the door a scowl. Is he saying to bring it on? Zoro laughed eagerly and angrily, what a clever guy. Luffy sprinted through the door and down the carpet, saying, "Come on, let's go already." The rest of the crew rushed inside after him, asking, "Hey, what does VIP mean?" Before pursuing them into the VIP room, Smoker questioned incoherently, "VIP? What do they have to do with Crocodile?" Perched atop a massive tree that provided a commanding view of the plaza surrounding the casino, Naruto scowled. He had just seen Vivi surrounded by billions with no way out, only to be rescued by a man named Pell, one of the Alabasta Guard's commanders and the strongest fighter in Alabasta. So Robin-chan has a devil fruit called the Hana Hana no Mi. Flower fruit, a powerful ability. After Karoo arrived, he had taken a plane to Rainbase to scout using his falcon-like zone devil fruit abilities. However, Vivi was taken to the Rain Dinner's basement, where he was certain Luffy and the others were being held. After Pell was defeated by Miss All Sunday, he stood up, having already given up his water clone, knowing that he couldn't see what was happening from where he was at the moment, and that, now that he knew how strong and dangerous Robin was, he couldn't take the chance that the Straw Hats could escape whatever trap they were in, especially since Crocodile was also present. There's no better way for me to meet my prospective crew member than to storm into his basement and set the Straw Hats free. Man, Sanji and Chopper sure took care of things out here, he said, looking away from the casino into the distance as he stepped off the tree and started to make his way into Rain Dinners, where he could see a larger pile of battered bodies littering the streets surrounding Rain Dinners. I get the feeling Crocodile's plan is already underway. If so, we can't waste much time. I have to get these guys out of here. Naruto-san! Naruto exclaimed as he turned to see Sanji approaching him. Before he could hear quick footsteps, Naruto questioned, "Sanji, did you get rid of the guys after you?" "Get him? Shoot that blonde bastard." Sanji scratched the back of his and smiled. He shrugged at Naruto's inquisitive gaze, saying, "Not really. I was going to do it here while none of the crew were here and then trick Crocodile to come out and go save the others. They always get captured, and with Marimo there I'm not surprised half the time." That made Naruto chuckle a little. "Stick to whatever plans you have, but I'll save the others. This is also part of my plan, to build a crew." "So it's already begun," Zoro muttered solemnly, while Luffy merely swore and gritted his teeth, and Usopp appeared terrified. When Crocodile told the Straw Hats and Vivi, who had just arrived with Robin, about his scheme, Nami was appalled. What an evil plan. Crocodile stood on one side of a table and Vivi sat on the other, and Crocodile laughed. Ha 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 ha. At the end, Robin was standing. "What do you think, Miss Wednesday? The plan that you helped set up is blooming. If you listen clearly, I bet you can hear the shouting all over Alabasta. And what do you suppose all of them believe? That we will protect them. Ha 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 ha." Vivi screamed, her eyes watering. "Stop it. How can you be so awful?" Crocodile laughed and closed his eyes. Ha 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 ha. Isn't that a little tearjerker? Love for one's country is what will destroy it in the end. I believe this individual satisfies the latter's definition of depraved, Zoro noted. That bastard. If only this cage weren't here, Luffy snarled, angry at Crocodile's arrogance and the circumstance. Crocodile started to count off his remaining hand and said, "Haha, I can remember all the hassle I had to go through to get this far. Collecting members, scraping up money to buy the silver necessary to produce the dance powder, stirring up towns on the brink of destruction, teaching my employees how to carry out false acts or army corruption, slowly eroding the people's trust in their king and increasing their frustration. Do you understand why I want to control your country so badly, Miss Wednesday?" With her arms tied around the chair, Vivi spat out, "As if I could understand what goes on in that disgusting mind of yours," and threw herself to the side. Tossing the chair with her, she muttered, frustrated at hardly making any progress, "Damn." Crocodile smirked and said, "Whoa there, what do you think you're doing, Miss Wednesday?" Vivi screamed at him, "We can stop you." As she kept struggling along the ground, "We can still make it in time. If we just go to Alubarna, directly east of here, if we can get to Alubarna before the rebellion does, there's a chance that we could stop them." Crocodile, wearing that same smug grin, asked rhetorically, "Oh, isn't that odd? We were just going to go there, as well straight to Alubarna, to ask your daddy one little question." "What?" Vivi asked, staring horrifiedly at the Shichibukai member. "Now what are you going to do to my father, huh?" Crocodile held up a key for everyone to see. "Huh? Which is more important to you, Princess Vivi? The people or your father? Haha, Miss Wednesday, if you want to come with us, then go right ahead, Crocodile said. Vivi blinked in surprise. Key, is that? Luffy screamed. A key? For this cage? At Crocodile. Gimme that. Damn it. Crocodile threw the key as a door in the floor opened. Adding to Luffy's ire, he yelled, "Ah!" as the key fell into the opening. Pit? Vivi asked, peering into the pit where the key had fallen in the center of an aquarium enclosed room. Crocodile grinned at the princess's devastated expression. Pointing to the pit, he begged, "Go get it, Miss Wednesday." Of course, the battle raging between the army and rebellion can be stopped. There are about 8 hours left until the true killing begins, but by then it would be too late. It would still take longer than that to get to Alubara, never mind retrieving the key and freeing your friends. He laughed when he realized that there was some killer intent from Vivi. If you want to stop the fighting, you'll have to leave here right now, abandon your friends Miss Wednesday, or else hundreds of thousands will perish. Of course, it's your choice whether or not you save these fools. You can go and open in the cage. Oops, if only I hadn't dropped the key through that hole in the floor, though. Since she had seen what was down there, Vivi swallowed at the mere thought, into the Bananadile lair. Crocodile gave a shrug. You could call it that. Bananadile? Luffy asked. Frowning in confusion, he noticed an odd sight in the water around them when he turned to face one of the windows. Whoa. Whoa, look at that. There's a crocodile growing out of that banana. Those crocodiles are enormous. Wah, this room is underwater? Weird bananas. Look at them, dumbass, the bananas are growing out of the crocodiles, they're weird crocodiles. Vivi cried out, "Ah," as she saw a bananadile in the pit ingest the key. It swallowed the key. Luffy said, "What's wrong, Vivi?" over the bars. Her eyes widened as she replied, "One of the bananadiles just swallowed the key." Luffy yelled at the princess, "What? Chase it down, make it spit it back up, and get us the hell out of here." Vivi screamed back, "I can't do that. Bananadiles are ferocious. They eat sea kings, you know? It'll eat me up the second I get close to it." Crocodile sighed, but it was obvious that he wasn't sorry. "Oh, I'm very sorry, those guys think everything I throw down there is food and eat it, and besides, now you can't even tell which one ate the key, what a pity." "What?" yelled Nami, furious with Crocodile. "That jerk." Zoro clutched one of his swords and squinted his eyes. "Damn, even if we get out of this cage, we still have to deal with those reptiles." Luffy raised an eyebrow at his nakama and pointed out the obvious, "Geez Zoro, we can't get out 'cause the big bastard ate the key, dummy." "I know that," exclaimed Zoro as the big doors opened. Crocodile and Nico Robin turned to go, saying, "Well then, we're going to take our leave now. Also, this room will automatically destroy itself in 1 hour. I have no use for this Baroque Works secret base anymore. Water will flood into this room and turn it into part of the Rainbase lake." He extended his arms with a grand gesture. 1 million innocent civilians or 4 worthless pirates with no future ahead of them. Your chances of saving just one of the two are slim. The bet. Here is your feelings, Miss Wednesday. Do you like gambling? Ha 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 ha. With her eternal smile, Robin remarked, "Even a princess is helpless in situations like these." Crocodile chuckled as he was given their attention again. "It was easy to do my work here. There are so many idiots, especially those young rebels and a certain old hole-digging man." He held up his hand to demonstrate his strength as a miniature sandstorm developed on the palm of his hand. "Did you really think sandstorms could strike the same place perfectly all of the time?" he asked. "I'll kill you," Vivi said, picturing Mr. Toto excavating. Usopp cried out, "Ah, the water's coming up," as water spewed from the earth and a bananadile emerged on the floor next to them, having entered through the door Crocodile and Robin had opened. "If you're going to abandon them, then now's the time. Do it, Miss Wednesday. You want to stop the rebellion, yes?" Crocodile laughed. "It's enormous," Vivi mumbled, her eyes wide with terror. Just as a hand touched her shoulder, a familiar voice called out to her right, "Relax." With wide eyes, Vivi looked up to see Naruto standing there in some way. "It's going to be just fine." "Naruto," Vivi muttered, feeling so relieved that she thought she might explode. Luffy exclaimed, "Naruto," with a huge smile that must have caused pain to his cheeks. Zoro laughed to himself. "Looks like he came after all. Phew, we're saved. Thank you," Usopp exclaimed in a humorous manner while tearing up and waving his hands. Smoker snarled, "Poseidon," for the first time since Crocodile's initial words. "Naruto-kun, thank God," Nami uttered in a voice of relief. Even though they had only recently met, the Straw Hats were starting to regard Naruto as a trustworthy ally based on his strength. After all, he came to save them, right? With the same grin on her face, Robin pondered. Crocodile gave the newcomer a scowl. How did you enter here? The doorway by the stairs is only way in and those have been sealed shut. With a sly smile, Naruto knelt behind Vivi and removed the ropes that bound her hands together. He rose and gestured toward a panel in the floor where water was seeping in gradually. The moment you let the water in this room, you opened the door for me, so to speak. Crocodile gave him a long look before grinning. So, the legendary Poseidon, it's an honor to actually meet you. Like many others I imagined you were dead, until my associate here Miss All Sunday confirmed you were alive. He continued to stare at Naruto intently. But do you expect me to believe you came from that small panel in the ground, never mind not being attacked by the Bananadiles? As Vivi rose behind him and the Bananadile approached them, Naruto shrugged. He shook his head as water engulfed his right hand. I could care less what you believe. If you know who I am, then you know of my abilities. Is it that crazy to believe I came up through that as water when you can turn into sand in a whim? He said. Woda Suraisa, water slicer? With a fingertip flick, a thin crescent of water struck the Bananadile in the middle, completely stopping its movements. Then, there was a sound like goo tearing apart, and the creature split in two, with Crocodile and Robin on one side and the other half falling to the other. As they stared at the enormous creature that was bleeding heavily on the ground and had its foul-smelling, fishy gut spread out all over the place, Luffy, Usopp, and even Nami mumbled, "Whoa." He pulled Blue Rose from the left side of his cloak and pointed it at Crocodile. He changed targets and aimed the gun at the lock on the sea stone gate, saying, "It's almost sad to see a man like yourself with so much power using it to destroy civilization instead of helping it grow." He told Smoker and the Straw Hats to move out of the way, guys. He pulled the trigger as they moved, causing his hockey water bullets to explode in two lightning-fast bursts that destroyed a portion of the gate. Luffy hurried over to the gate and pushed it, which caused it to open, which made him smile. Woohoo, we're free. Had Naruto not extended a hand to them, the others would have celebrated more. Stay where you are. That goes for you two Smoker Crocodiles out of your league right now. Having you behind those bars will protect for the meantime where he can't touch you. What? Luffy cried incredulously. We need to kick his ass and get to Alubara. Smoker grunted, sounding disgusted simply by agreeing with him. Uzumaki's right. We're on a time limit before that water pours in more. If a fight starts out now, then you may as well give up now. With a smile, Naruto holstered Blue Rose. A battle down here would be a little too one-sided, in my case obviously, so maybe it would be best if you went on your way, Crocodile. The renowned Poseidon, the ruler of the sea, and the world's most wanted pirate, were standing in front of him, and Crocodile bit into his cigar in response to being talked down to. However, he knew not to push it. Ring. RRRING. 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 A baby den mush, which could only be used to contact nearby comrades, was ringing when Robin reached into her coat pocket and took it out. She whispered, "Phone call," and then clicked the side of it. What? Naruto and the Straw Hats were alerted when a recognizable but distorted voice called out, "Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?" Robin responded and asked, "Yes, I can. You're millions, aren't you?" The voice sounded a little irritated. "Hey, is this getting through? I ain't never used one of these crappy small phone snails. Hello?" With clenched teeth, Robin questioned, "What is it?" "Oh, okay. I'll just talk like this." In response to the snail phone, Crocodile yelled, "Hey! Spit it out already. What happened?" "This is the shitty restaurant." "Oh, that voice, I recognize that voice from somewhere before. Cough, welcome, sir." "Unpleasant restaurant," Crocodile whispered in recognition, recalling the phone call they received from Lil Garden, who was posing as Mr. 3 and giving them a false report. "Ah, it seems you remember me. I'm so glad. All 4 Straw Hats should be locked up in that cage. Or they were before Poseidon blew the lock, but does this mean there are others?" Crocodile gritted his teeth. "Did you hear that, hey?" Surprised, Luffy asked his crew. Nami whispered, equally shocked, "Shitty restaurant, sounds like Sanjumf." Usopp swiftly covered Luffy's mouth with his hand to prevent the moron from disclosing their other member. "Luffy, hold on," Usopp muttered urgently, perhaps he is unaware of him. A portion of Luffy's statement, "Sanji-san." Yes, Sanji-san and Tony-kun are still outside, caused Vivi's mouth to open in surprise. Naruto, who had been wondering where Chopper and he had disappeared to since he hadn't seen them in a long time, grinned when he realized it was also Sanji on the phone snail. Even though Crocodile was still unaware because he was lost in his thoughts, Robin, who had also heard and comprehended some of what Luffy said, grinned. "Who the hell are you?" Crocodile insisted. "Me? I am Mr. Prince, said the snail on the phone. At the succinct response, Crocodile scowled. I see, Mr. Prince, where are you, too? I can't tell you, you'll come kill me if I do, won't you? The question of whether you can do it or not is still up in the air. There was a brief pause before the sounds of fighting and crashing were heard, followed by heavy breathing. Ha, pesky bastard, a different voice came over the phone, causing the Straw Hat's eyes to widen while Naruto's narrowed and Crocodile smirked. I hear you have my crew, by the way. Very well, I'll just be. The speaker said, what should we do with this oddball? RRGH. Vivi heard a pained yell and instinctively leaned forward, asking, Sanji-san? No. Knowing how vulnerable she was in the moment, Naruto grabbed her by the shoulder and dragged her to him. Stay where you are, he said. This isn't over yet, he muttered to her. Where are you? Let it out. Crocodile insisted. Yes sir, at the front gate of the casino called Rain Dinners in Rainbase. Ha 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 ha. With a gleeful laugh, Crocodile said, all right, let's head to the front gate. Are you certain? The millions still don't know who their boss is, Robin inquired. As they made their way to the upstairs staircase, Crocodile shook his head and said, I'm not going as their boss other than the number agents. We haven't shown ourselves. What is so strange about Crocodile, the owner of the casino, approaching the front door to inquire about what is happening. As they arrived at the staircase and started to ascend, Robin nodded and said, very well. Halfway up, Crocodile turned to the group and said, oh, I nearly forgot about you people. You can all die together because you're such devoted friends. He slashed at the stairs with his right hand, which developed a blade of sand around it. Desato Supada. The bottom portion of the stairs collapsed in on itself, leaving a huge opening that was inaccessible thanks to the expansion of the sand blade, which sliced straight through the staircase from side to side. After giving Naruto a mocking salute with his hook, Crocodile said, it's a shame you have to die here. It would have been fun killing you, Robin, and he then departed. Clearly he forgot that water doesn't bother me. Well, salt water does, and I have the same weakness as any other devil fruit user, but I can just create a bubble of water around me and swim through it. Naruto simply grinned up at where they left through the large double doors. However, this time, it's not just me. The water is getting higher. They were staring at the panels where it was approaching much more quickly when Zoro yelled in alarm. Now what on earth are we going to do? With a great deal of fear, Nami asked. I'm on my toes. My knees. Usopp let out a scream. You need to get close to me if you want to survive this, Naruto said, picking up Vivi and stumbling toward the cage. The cage may be open now because of him, but Smoker could feel the salt in the seawater affecting him, and he actually looked pale at the idea of getting help from him. How will that help? Nami inquired. With this many of us, I need us all to be close to one another, but I can use my water to enclose us all in a bubble and carry us through the seawater like everyone else who uses devil fruit. I get weak in the knees when exposed to seawater, but if I use my water to create a bubble, I can swim through it as the water rose, Naruto clarified. The same rules apply in this case, but you guys won't be able to breathe. Smoker grunted, in anticipation of becoming ill. I'm in charge of it, Luffy let out a scream. Okay. Nami came to Naruto's side and hugged his arm, which caused him to chuckle a little when he noticed that she was shivering. Vivi followed suit, realizing that there was no other option, though his good looks undoubtedly didn't influence her choice. Come on now. Naruto yelled at each of them with the exception of Smoker. They all approached him one by one and either grabbed him or one of the others and drew closer. Guess we've got no choice, Zoro muttered. You can either grab on or die, Smoker, Naruto sighed, but he couldn't really be blamed because, in the end, he was his enemy. It's your decision, but I don't want to abandon you to die down here. Smoker nodded reluctantly, almost painfully, and said, fine. He grunted and then grabbed one of the other's shoulders, bringing them all very close together and touching an arm or shoulder. Naruto nodded, starting to sense the effects of the seawater. Good. Wotoraku. Water sprang from various parts of Naruto's body and raised them all up, preventing any part of them from coming into contact with the seawater. Hold your breath. The water that raised them then swiftly encircled them in the shape of an orb filled with water, but as Naruto had stated, it had no effect on the devil fruit users. Now that they can hold their breath, I have to get us above ground. Just a second before dinner's in the rain outside. What the hell happened here? Crocodile asked, surveying the area in front of Rain Dinners where bodies were stacked and dispersed, essentially covering any ground from the naked eye. With this added to what Pell the Falcon did, all of our millions in town have been wiped out, quite easily I might add. Robin also surveyed the strewn about bodies with a hint of amusement at how easily their forces had been defeated. As he approached a downed million who was barely conscious, Crocodile gritted his teeth and asked, What happened? This was done by whom? Squinting up at Crocodile, the fallen million had blood on his face. This guy. He called himself Mr. Prince. He left towards the south, through town, he said. Just now? Crocodile asked, looking around as he looked. He found a cloaked person running away. Him. Don't think you'll escape me, you piece of shit. Why don't you let him go? Asked Robin, shaking her head. Silence up. Crocodile snarled at her. He murdered all of my workers. I refuse to be humiliated in this manner. His legs turned to sand, and he sprang forward, flying along the ground, growling. Naruto-san said he'll take care of everything earlier. I'll have to trust him, said Sanji, with a sigh, pulling out a cigarette, placing it between his lips, lighting it with a match, taking a drag, blowing out the smoke, and leaning back against the wall he smirked as he watched Crocodile chase Mr. Prince. But he glanced at Rain Dinners when he saw the bridge collapse into the lake below. With his legs returning to their solid shape, Crocodile halted where he had last seen the man in the cloak. Where are you? I will find you and I will kill you, he said, looking around but failing to spot anyone who looked like the man he was pursuing. A smaller, cloaked chopper passed Crocodile on their way to Rain Dinners. Worked like a charm. In the town of Rain Dinners, where there was surprisingly no railing in the way, the orb of water containing the Straw Hats, a princess, and a captain of the Marines rose up from the lake. Naruto let the orb open up so he could put Nami and Vivi, who were still clinging to him but were having trouble breathing, on the street before doing the same with the others, though Smoker and Zoro threw themselves onto the street with a thud, because they didn't want to be manhandled in that manner, Smoker more than the others. After observing them removing themselves, Sanji rushed to them and knelt down to speak to Luffy, who was spitting water. You alive, you're Luffy? After sitting on the water, Naruto responded, he should be fine. Sanji's eyes widened as he said, he was only in normal water, or my water to be more precise. He's probably just out of it slightly from lack of oxygen. How are you doing? Sanji gestured to Naruto, who was sitting on the water with his arms folded, while Nami and Vivi had to drag themselves to dry land. Naruto grinned and shrugged, saying, I am water. I can alter my own and the water's pressure, which enables me to sit on it, walk on it, fly, and even use it to my advantage in battle, he added. I can sink even if I fall in seawater, but I can only travel in it by placing myself in a bubble before I enter. If I just put a layer of water on top of another source, I cans it down like this. Since she was on land, Vivi had made the decision to assist the others in getting up, so she grabbed Usopp's long nose and gave him a painful ragging. Come on, get up, Usopp-san. What are you doing? Nami, who was also assisting by pulling Usopp by his cloak, asked the nearly unconscious man. How could you not hold your breath for a couple minutes? Hearing that made Sanji's eyes sparkle, and Naruto sighed, knowing a pervert when he saw one, though he would be lying if he claimed he hadn't eyed Nami or Vivi once or twice. He hadn't been in a relationship of any kind since the incident 32 years ago because he had lost everything, though he had dated a few women. He wasn't sure what that meant to him because he had been afraid of falling in love again at the time, but now he realized that was foolish, and it wasn't like you could stop loving someone. There was nothing you could do to control who or when you fell in love. Nami Schwan, holding your breath for so long could only mean one thing. Sanji had already arrived at Nami, who was drenched and clinging to his clothes. Smack, Naruto muttered. Idiot. Sanji's face was buried in the ground, and a red-faced Nami was standing over him with his fist still up. Nami-chan. He called to the orange-haired girl, who smiled at him as though she hadn't just beaten her nakama. You know, I've lived a long time, and in that time I learned how to control certain aspects of myself. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. He responded with a blush and a tentative nod. But not even my control is good enough when I see a beautiful woman like yourself, soaking wet and your clothes cling to you like a second skin. That cloak hides nothing. Nami looked down and saw that what he had said was accurate. Her body was visible through the wet clothing. Her nipples, which had coldened from the water, were hard enough to show through, and since she had gone braless, only her shirt was protecting them. Her skin was also exposed, and the shirt seemed to fit in every curve, making her body more prominent. She closed her cloak tightly, blushing again and ducking her head to avoid Naruto. As their friends started to gather themselves, Naruto showed up next to Nami in a spectacular display of speed and said, You shouldn't be embarrassed, you have no reason to be. He smiled and leaned closer to her ear, his breath tickling her neck and making her shiver despite their predicament. You're a beautiful woman, and believe an old guy like me when I say so, he said. Nami, who was surprisingly a babbling mess as she stared after Naruto, was winked at before he left, saying, I've seen a lot of women naked or otherwise, but seeing a healthy young woman like you like that, well, it makes me feel young again. The only thing that would have turned her off to Naruto was if he had been an ass, and so far the blonde had been nothing but pleasant and helpful. Of course, if Naruto had money or some valuable treasure on him, it would just be a bonus, bestowed. I barely know you, you're much older than me and you're gathering your crew, but after getting me so aroused none of that matters right now. In actuality, she didn't mind the age difference between her and Naruto. It would have bothered her if he had looked and acted his age. She complained, "Gah, men are so confusing." Before returning to her previous task, she made sure to kick Sanji's body quickly for fun. One day, I'll get him back and I'll make sure I leave him with a problem his hands won't be able to solve. Though she wasn't entirely ignorant, she did feel something when she saw Luffy fight when they first met and later when she saw Naruto fight in moments like the present when he was soaking wet and had that commanding presence. Vivi, who had witnessed Naruto's flirting, simply looked at them both in confusion. She was too young and had lived a sheltered but busy life after infiltrating Baroque works for 3 years. So anything to do with sex or hormones was not necessary in those days, so she never bothered with it at all. If someone asked her why she suddenly had a bright red face, she would blame the heat, but one might think differently given the way her eyes never left Naruto while she dragged Usopp. "Go quickly this way." He sighed and waved them away, saying, "Go. Only this time will I let you get away," he said, letting them leave without a fight. Smoker stared at the Straw Hat crew after being pulled out of the destroyed resort rain dinners, which Crocodile had sunken to the bottom of the lake it was situated on to finish them all off. Uzumaki Naruto, the one who had saved them all, including him, was also standing with the Straw Hats, proving where he had suspected his allegiance stood at the moment. "But you're dead by the time we meet again. Do not forget Straw Hat Luffy." Smoker was staring at Naruto when he opened his eyes. "Guys, get going to Alubara. How about you?" After determining he could trust the former marine killer, Usopp inquired. "Naruto-kun. Join us." They had all been prepared to flee when Nami yelled. "You know what to do, Luffy. Don't give up, no matter what," Naruto said, nodding at him. "You're capable of winning." Just as Marines emerged from the rooftops and started to charge down the opposite end of the street they were on, Luffy turned to face Naruto. "Are you sure?" His voice became more serious as he asked. The Marines were pointing their guns at Naruto, who chuckled and said, "I'm not going anywhere right now. Unlike you guys, I'm too dangerous to leave running about." Uzumaki Naruto, a bounty of 750 million belly, given the epithet of the Poseidon, and the world's most wanted pirate. Smoker said this as if he were reading a document. "There's no way in hell I'm letting you go without a fight." With a laugh, Naruto turned to face the stunned crew and said, "Get going. You have a country to save." "Naruto-san. Say we'll see you again," Vivi yelled. "I swear." Naruto smiled at her. "Remember that I'm going to save this nation as well?" Vivi gave him a big smile and then nodded. Luffy finally gave Naruto a nod before turning to face his nakama and saying, "Let's go." He didn't wait for a response before running off, but he could feel them following him. "Is this correct? Is it safe to leave him behind with all of those Marines and Smoker?" Nami inquired anxiously. Luffy was just grinning. "You should be asking whether or not if it's alright to leave Moku Moku and the Marines with Naruto." At that, the Straw Hats all started laughing. Usopp nearly stumbled, but then he remembered. Did Smoker mention that Naruto-san had a 750 million belly bounty? That time, they all almost fell. "Nani? Marines and Smoker versus Naruto. They're going to become very strong in the future. The least I can repay them for showing me kindness instead of fear for who I am is by holding off all of the Marines in the town," Naruto said, staring after the Straw Hats as they started to disappear from view. Seeing them so close as friends and crewmates reminded him of his own crew from his old days as a captain with his former nakama. As the group of Marines approached him, Smoker watched as the crew took off, leaving him behind. "Sir, won't you pursue them?" After the Straw Hats left with the princess, Smoker shook his head and gripped his preferred weapon, saying, "No, we have more pressing matters." He nodded at Naruto, who stayed motionless, ignoring the fact that all of the Marines went on alert and pointed their guns at him. "Call back the men who went off to chase them. They won't catch them. Call headquarters and bring them back here. Direct them to send all nearby Marine vessels to Alabasta. Call for reinforcements." The Marine who had been addressing him asked, looking at him in disbelief. "However, I doubt that the higher-ranking officers will release them to engage in combat with so few pirates." "Since when have I listened to the opinions of my superior officers?" Smoker asked, turning his irritated gaze to the man speaking. "Go now." He concluded by frightening the man away so he could complete his assignment. "Haku Ryo no Sumoka, are you certain you want to send people away?" "White Hunter Smoker?" Naruto inquired. I have you completely surrounded, from the rooftops, the streets, and every direction, and then there's me in the way, Smoker said, grunting as he blew smoke from the cigars out of his mouth. You're not running away. It won't make a difference to send a few soldiers away. You're right about that, Naruto laughed. You could bring the entirety of the Marineford and you still won't catch me. Smoker simply smiled while holding his jute and said, we'll see about that. He made a signal with his hand that caused all 30 Marines, the majority of whom were currently being called back or otherwise knocked out by the Straw Hats, to shoot at Naruto with rifles, cannon guns, or any other type of gun. Every bullet, whether cannon or otherwise, just blew right through his body as it turned to water where he was struck, just like any other Logia devil fruit user. However, he healed much more quickly than the bullets, and by the time another shot was fired, the hole in his body would have healed. However, because there was a good number of shots, it was a complete mess, with water splashing everywhere, his body covered in smoke, and he was disfigured as he healed, only to be blown away again. But Naruto just stood there, not flinching at all, displaying any discomfort as he was torn apart. What a waste of ammunition. Naruto shook his head as they stopped firing, his body instantly fixing itself to give the impression that he hadn't been touched. He reached behind his back and grabbed the Nejibana staff, bringing it out in front of him and driving the end into the ground, causing the ground beneath him to split apart from the force. Water started to spin at the tip of the trident end's middle blade as Nejibana was held at Smoker. Hanryu. Tearing torrent. Just as the last time he used it, a huge blast of water shot out, speeding across the street so quickly that the grocery stores blew apart and the buildings on either side shook. Smoker had already turned his hands to smoke and thrust them at the water's torrent, but he knew Naruto wasn't playing around because this time he used it against him was more powerful than the first time. Hoedo Buro. White blow. A cloud of thick smoke rose from his arms and met the water torrent halfway, causing both elements to explode instantly. It then turned into a sort of vortex that grew so high and spun so quickly that the buildings around it started to collapse. Naruto's left arm erupted into water, which he used to stab a Marine on the far end, but it was too late because he had already spun around to face the dozen or so Marines that had appeared earlier just as the Straw Hats had left. Woda Karasha. Water Crusher. Before the Marine could react, his water-enveloped arm shot out at him and struck him. However, before any of the others could react, Naruto swung the same arm in an arc, severely smashing them all with the condensed water arm. The Marines were sent flying into different buildings, and depending on where and what they hit, they were either knocked out or killed. By this point, the elemental vortex had gradually subsided before disappearing entirely, leaving nothing but complete destruction in its wake. Knowing what was about to happen, he used his Haoshoku Haki to turn his legs into water, and like many other Logia fruit users, he shot up into the sky as if he was flying. However, it was much more difficult to accomplish this feat with water than with smoke or sand because it required a lot more work. He had to use enough force to literally propel himself into the air to fly, or he could simply change his weight to make himself as light as air so that he could float as if he had changed into the water molecules that were frequently found in the atmosphere. He could do almost anything that involved water in some way, from changing its density from as light as the air to as heavy as the seafloor, thanks to training with your devil fruit, which allowed you to perfect it to the point where practically anything was possible. Of course, that was only the beginning. That damn Haki of his, there wasn't any indication that he had received a premonition. Did he receive it so fast that in reality it all happened in the blink of an eye, or faster? Smoker stabbed at that position with his jute where he had been moments earlier, growling at his miss even though he was certain he hadn't made a sound or indicated that he was about to attack. He ignored him, however, as he now hovered just above the rooftops of the buildings on which the remaining Marines were currently stationed. As he spread his hands, Nejibana still in his grasp, water molecules started to solidify around him. As previously mentioned, or perhaps not, Naruto had trained in his Waki no Mi to the point where he was able to use the water molecules in the surrounding atmosphere, just like the oceans, lakes, or sea. In fact, he had been proficient with his devil fruit for as long as he could remember, literally, since he had it in his first memory, which was shortly after he developed amnesia of the first 5 years of his life. What on earth is this individual? He is not a human. We're going to die, oh god. Condensed water started to form what appeared to be needles all around him, and he chose to ignore the Marines yelling and the few bullets that went through his body. Eventually, water-shaped needles literally filled the sky as they floated around the rooftops, all pointing at the Marines. Sensatsu Suisho. 1,000 flying water needles of death. He swung his arms forward, and in a second, every needle in the sky rained down on the Marines. Vanishing through the sky as though teleporting in a second, the water-condensed needles hit every Marine on the rooftops, and they all fell forward at once, dead. Even so, there was no blood. A moment later, The needles lost their shape and splashed onto the Marines, creating a big puddle on each rooftop. He had expertly struck the right spots on their bodies, causing them to instantly die. Hoedo Supaku, White Spark, Smoker, seeing all of his men instantly defeated, leapt up at Naruto in his dense smoke form. It seemed to freeze for a second, but then Smoker's current form seemed to re-solidify where Naruto's foot struck, just before he was blasted from the sky and into the ground, sending a shockwave out that struck all the buildings, causing them to topple with the Marines still on them. Naruto, sensing his approach, span in the air and turned his left leg solid just as Smoker appeared in front of him and smashed his foot into the cloud of smoke. A pillar of smoke rose up from where he collided with the ground, but it wasn't Smoker. Naruto let himself fall to the debris of one of the buildings and straightened both legs for a proper landing. He landed gracefully, bending his knees as he touched the ground, and then he rose to his full height, his cloak still on, Nejibana in hand, and not a single article of clothing or hair out of place. Smoker, is this all you have? Crocodile versus Luffy. You wouldn't believe Crocodile and Nico Robin were standing in front of him, and this time they were in Crocodile's territory, judging by Luffy's relaxed posture and head cocked back as he watched his Nakama escape on top of a huge crab that Chopper had somehow managed to get. As she watched the crab disappear into the distance, Nico Robin chuckled and said, "Ha ha ha, the princess just ran out on us." After turning to face his partner, Crocodile said, "I think your games have gone on a little too long, Straw Hat Luffy. The agents in Alubara should be done with their duties soon, call them." Ignoring Crocodile's inquisitive expression, Luffy forced himself to sit cross-legged and said, "You know her, she's so weak, but she tries to save everything she can. She can't bear to abandon anything, so she's always in pain. She wishes to put an end to the uprising without losing anyone." The ridiculousness of it all made Crocodile laugh. Without anyone dying? That kind of weak, mushy fool is common. True battle is unknown to them, don't you agree with me? The ground beneath them shook a little as he saw a huge vortex of smoke and water from Rainbase rise into the sky, but Luffy remained silent for a moment before responding. "Yes," he stood up and said, "but as long as you're alive, she will fight you to her grave. I'm stopping you right here for that reason." Kuhahaha. Ha 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 ha. Completely absurd, you can't be saved. This ought to serve as a good illustration. Crocodile grinned at Luffy and said, "Anyone who conspires with others dies as a result. Hundreds like that have been left in the dust by me." Luffy cracked his knuckles and smiled casually. "Well then, I guess that makes you pretty stupid." Ahahaha. Robin held a hand over her mouth, but Crocodile actually blinked in shock at that and gritted his teeth so much that a vein popped out of her cheek from the strain. "What's so amusing? Nico Robin, do you also want to die?" Crocodile yelled at Robin. She turned away and started to walk, but Robin smiled fearlessly and said, "If that's how you feel about it, do as you wish. What happened to your promise not to call me by that name? I guess only those legendary pirates receive that courtesy." Crocodile grinned. Robin recognized the person he was referring to when he asked, "TCH, whatever, where are you heading?" Robin looked into the town to see the vortex subside, but she didn't even turn around, ahead to Alubara. As the Straw Hat captain gazed at Luffy with interest, Crocodile muttered, "Crazy woman," and threw a small hourglass at his feet. "I'll give you 3 minutes," he said. "I won't have any more time to play with you after that. Is there anything wrong with that?" With his left hand gripping his right bicep, Luffy cocked his fist back and said, "Nope, that's fine with me." Luffy was standing in front of him, finally prepared to fight. Gomu Gomu no Pistoru. Gum Gum Pistol. Luffy let off his rubber arm out in a punch, but Crocodile's body simply turned to sand and shifted out of the way. He reformed and came at Luffy with a swing of his golden hook, who bent over backwards to avoid the metal appendage whilst his arm snapped back. Luffy's right leg extended into the air as he dodged. Gomu Gomu no Sutampu. Gum Gum Stamp. Luffy flipped over and threw his leg out at Crocodile, but his body turned to sand as it struck him, and his leg simply smashed through him. When Luffy's leg snapped back and he landed on his feet, panting a little from the heat, he looked shocked. Crocodile's body reformed, and he blew smoke from his cigar, seemingly unconcerned that he was currently engaged in combat. "Let me tell you something important, Straw Hat. Whatever you do, you will never, ever." He started punching the air because Luffy didn't want to listen to him. Gomu Gomu no Gacharingu. Gum Gum Gatling. Luffy launched rapid-fire punches at Crocodile, each punch busting right through his sandy body in multiple blurs that just looked like holes were opening up in Crocodile's body. When the attack ended, however, once again Crocodile's body reformed. No worse for wear whatsoever. "Sand monster." Luffy yelled angrily at him before launching another assault. The Crocodile sighed languidly and said, "Listen up, Straw Hat. These mosquito bite attacks are useless against me, due to the fact that you will never. Again unwilling to listen, Luffy pushed his arms back as far as he could and exclaimed, Gomu Gomu no bazooka. Gum Gum bazooka. Luffy snapped his arms forward and punched 2 twin holes through Crocodile's chest, blowing a mass of sand out of the back. Luffy was not shocked or surprised at this point and shot his leg as high into the air as he could stretch it before bringing it down at high speed. Gomu Gomu no Ono. Axe of Gum Gum combat. It appeared as though Luffy had simply vaporized Crocodile after his vicious axe kick struck him and tore him to pieces. Damn it, damn it, damn it. Stupid Sandgator, did I crush you? Luffy stomped on the sand and yelled. Crocodile, who suddenly materialized behind Luffy, remarked, I told you already that none of that would work. Furious, Luffy turned around and said, you jerk. When Luffy's fist exploded in his face again, Crocodile mumbled, no matter how hard you fight Rubberman, you will never deaf. Ready for anything. Luffy leapt back. Deaf? How on earth have you been attempting to communicate? Why don't we end the games now, Straw Hat Luffy? Crocodile glared at Luffy, his eyes full of murder. Veins throbbed around his eyes. Luffy gave him a fierce look and said, I've been fighting hard, damn it, I can't hit him, he keeps dissolving, he said, gritting his teeth as he gazed at Crocodile. Putting his hand back, Crocodile grinned and said, you and I are 2 pirates in 2 completely different leagues. Crocodile shaped his right hand into a loose, chainsaw-like blade of swiftly moving sand and said, Desato Supada. He plunged it into the ground with the desert sword, and a moment later, the attack tore through the ground like a torpedo, tearing it apart. What? Upon seeing the move split a rock right down the middle, Luffy cartwheeled out of the way on pure instinct as the ground split apart beneath him and ended up landing on his head. Ouch. He saw Luffy marveling at the enormous rip in the desert that he had just created, and Crocodile smiled at the rubber man, saying, you sure wouldn't have been saying, ouch, if it had hit you. Devil fruit powers can be very strong in battle depending on how you use and train them. However, I've perfected my power. Unlike the other idiots who are only happy to possess it. You'll wish you hadn't stood up to me, just like everyone else. Desato Girasole. Desert Sunflower. Crocodile plunged his hand into the earth, and the desert immediately collapsed before him, creating a quicksand pit that began to suck Luffy in. What? Luffy started to outrun the swiftly moving sand as he felt himself being pulled to the center, screaming, I'm being sucked down by the sand. Crocodile laughed as he observed, are you unfamiliar with quicksand? There is no need for a grave with this very practical coffin. I can sense that the sand is being pulled into an underground river thanks to my abilities. No living thing in the desert can compete with me head to head. Crocodile smiled as he observed Luffy thrashing around. Some sands won't burden me. You're falling. Luffy thrusted his hands high into the sky as he strained against the sandpit. Gomu Gomu no. Luffy brought his hands back down and slammed them into the sandpit. Bazooka. The blow to the sand threw Luffy skyward, where he tangled his fingers in a net and said, if I can't punch you, I'll capture you. Gum Gum Bazooka. Amy. Gomu Gomu. Gum Gum net. Luffy formed a net out of Crocodile by extending his fingers around him. Don't you get it? Crocodile turned to the sand once more and drifted through it, encasing the next in sand. An individual of your caliber can never. However, Luffy refused to listen. Gomu Gomu no Muchi. Gum Gum whip. Luffy's long kick sliced Crocodile's sandy body in half, tch, doing the same old things again, huh? Luffy fell from the air right into the range of a strike from Crocodile just as his body reformed. Barchin. Crocodile swung his right arm and used a crescent of sand to sever Luffy's right arm, crescent-shaped dune. Luffy gazed at his arm in horror as he hit the ground, saying, my arm, it's oh. My arm became a mummy. Luffy's entire arm appeared dead and shriveled. As usual, Crocodile smirked with satisfaction and said, I sucked the water out of your arm because it's sand to give you a taste of the desert. I might kill you by sucking the water from your entire body. Luffy clenched his jaw and said, enough. A moment later, his eyes widened. That's it. Luffy ran back to where he had dropped his cloak and bag earlier. Water. He drank his barrel and said, ha ha ha, if only Naruto were here, this would be so easy. His right arm, which had been dead and mummified, was now bulging with water filling it and had veins sticking out of it, giving it a muscular appearance. Ridiculous, sneered Crocodile. No, it isn't. The old sandy guy in Yuba dug up this water all night. Luffy yelled at him. Do you want to hear his words? Merely sand will never defeat Yuba. Gomu Gomu? Are you still trying this? Asked Crocodile, rolling his eyes. This is becoming monotonous. With a mouthful of sand, Luffy threw himself at Crocodile and bit his head off. No Baku Baku. Chomp chomp, gum gum. Enough nonsense. Be ready to die. Along with the fertile soil of Yuba, Crocodile roared as he exploded out of Luffy's mouth, causing Luffy to fall back and spit out sand. Luffy looked at Crocodile bewildered as he spat out the remaining sand in his mouth. Huh? Crocodile maintained a neutral expression. Your 3 minutes are up. A tiny sandstorm raged on his hand, and he said, I told you I didn't have time to play with you sables. Sandstorm. Crocodile hurled the sandstorm ahead, which instantly transformed into a sand tornado that swiftly overpowered Luffy. The sand is nice and dry today, he laughed mockingly. Rainbase. Oh. To the east, a sandstorm in the sky. Get out. If we stay, we'll be buried alive in the sand. Hold on. We should be missed by the southerly wind. As he watched the twister of sand rise into the sky, Naruto heard all the shouting from the civilians who had not been caught in his and Smoker's fight. So it is Crocodile. Naruto turned to see Smoker standing with his arms crossed and glaring at the twister. He had just emerged from the crater he had been kicked into a minute earlier and was about to continue the fight when his subordinate Tashigi had caught up to them just as the twister appeared. Naruto put Nejibana on his back under his cloak and said, Luffy's fighting him. He turned to face the twister. Tashigi glanced uneasily at her captain. What do we do, Smoker-san? Smoker bit into his twin cigars and sighed. You mentioned that Straw Hat Luffy was opposing him, why don't you? He questioned Naruto. How is Luffy supposed to grow if I fight his battles for him? Laughed Naruto. This is their time. This is Luffy's problem. He started to leave, and Smoker didn't bother to stop him. A word of warning, Smoker, hurt the people I care about, and I promise, I will kill you. Older people like me are just relics of the past here to teach the current generation. Aren't you going to stop him, Smoker-san? Smoker frowned as he saw Naruto transform into a huge body of water and launch himself into the air. Tashigi frowned as he asked. Looking at the damage their battle had caused, Smoker shook his head and said, it wouldn't matter, he was always one step ahead of me during our fight, and I never managed to hit him. Keep in mind that, despite their dislike for it, people must admit defeat at certain points in their lives. He couldn't hit him once. What kind of monster is Uzumaki Naruto? Tashigi asked her superior, raising her eyebrows at the implications. Hats made of straw. Vivi-chan. What's the matter? Nami asked, glancing at Vivi, who was gazing back at their starting point. With her eyes wide with terror, Vivi replied in a deathly whisper, there's a sandstorm, it's right above Rainbase. What? Nami looked over in the direction of Rainbase to see an ever-growing twister decimate the desert. Holy crap. Is Crocodile capable of doing that? Vivi bit her lip in concern, saying, yes, and Luffy-san is fighting him. Naruto-san is also there. What if they are both caught in it? The victims of Crocodile's sandstorm have all perished. Zoro, seated on the giant crab and leaning on his swords, grunted, calm down. Uzumaki has been fighting and surviving for decades, and Luffy wouldn't let a thing like that kill him. Neither of them will be killed by some sand. I know a way that will help you relax, Vivi. Schwan, said Sanji, gazing at Vivi with a heart in his only visible eye. She shook her head and turned to face the twister, saying, please be alright, Luffy, Naruto-kun. Nami merely punched his head into the back of the crab and left the now bleeding cooked, perverted bastard. Crocodile versus Luffy. Crocodile gave the rubber man a sly smile and said, listen, Straw Hat Luffy here, north to south winds are always predominant. Where do you think the sandstorm I just created will hit when it's nice and big? If it rides that wind and moves south once it matures? South? Luffy asked. Crocodile said ruthlessly, Yuba. Luffy lunged ahead and seized Crocodile's shoulders, saying, what on earth are you doing? Stop it. You have nothing to do with that old sandy guy. Luffy split off and began to run after the sandstorm. Damn you, stop, quit. Slowly and cruelly, Crocodile laughed, Kuhahaha, give it up, even I won't be able to stop this wind once it gets going. With a mean smile, he said, Yuba is done. Stop it. Luffy grabbed onto Crocodile and started yelling into his face, unmindful of the danger being so close. Possessed. Stop it right now. After being stabbed by Crocodile's hook, Luffy ceased to yell. Blood trickled from the bladed side as Crocodile pulled him off the ground by the hook. Who the devil do you think I am? Like you, Straw Hat Luffy, there are many rookies who are just talkative. Yuba will perish, he said, glancing at the sandstorm he had created. The Grand Line is full of them. It will be guaranteed by this final sandstorm. Their savage love for others will ultimately bring this nation to its knees, and it will be the spark that ignites the rebels and makes them more Straw Hat. The same for you. Had you not given in to your weaker emotions, you would have lived longer. Water. even water won't improve your situation. Crocodile was somewhat taken aback when Luffy reached up and took his arm feebly around the hook. You're still alive. He threw Luffy off of the hook and let him sink into the sandpit. Luffy clutched at his wound and spit up blood whilst gasping out deep breaths and screaming. You must be in quite some pain. He watched Luffy sink beneath the sand and laughed at his suffering, saying, Don't worry, it will all be over soon. When Luffy's body was no longer visible, he shook his head and turned around, saying, What a waste of my time. Luffy's head emerged from the pit after he had left. MEAT. A swarm of hands emerged from the sand and lifted Luffy out, multiplying hand after hand until he was safely on the desert sands. Nico Robin had to take a step back as a stream of water descended from the sky, and before it hit the ground, it transformed into Naruto, who kneeled next to Luffy on landing. Damn, you look like crap. Grimacing at the sight of the blood on his face, he looked up at Robin and said, I'd say thanks for saving him, but even with our social visits you're still the enemy, so how's it going to be? I'm not here to kill him, said Robin, raising her hands. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to save him. With bleary eyes, Luffy glanced up at Robin and said, Thank you. Why do you fight? Robin asked passively, looking down at Luffy. Are you all D's? That seemed like a pointless question. She scowled when Luffy simply stared at her feebly. Just what in the world are you? She asked as a hand appeared elsewhere and threw Luffy's straw hat, which she caught. I've located you. What's the name of D? Frowned Naruto. Now that I think about it, what is that? D? Gold D Roger, Monkey D Dragon, Monkey D Garp, Monkey D Luffy, Portgas D Rouge, and Portgas D Ace. Whatever became of Vivi-sama? A man wearing a long white robe adorned with brown stars caught Naruto and Robin's attention. He wore a turban covered in brown stars and had two purple lines running down his face from his eyes. When Robin saw him approaching them, he grinned and said, Oh, you're awake. With his sword in his hand, Pell hobbled over to them and said, I will not be defeated as easily as I once was now that I know the nature of your powers. Oh, stop it, Robin said with a quiet laugh before turning to leave. Avoid hurting yourself any more than you already have. You really came at the right time. How about saving that boy? He is the valiant and courageous knight who brought your princess here safely. The princess is doing well. She is currently traveling to Alubara. As she reached her animal, Robin turned to Naruto and said, I hope we meet again on better circumstances. Uzumaki. Naruto, I don't know what will happen, but you know the state that this country is in. As Robin departed on her animal transport, Pell tightened his hold on his sword and, looking down at Luffy, he at last recognized the person Robin had mentioned. Huh? Luffy clung to his robe and said, Meet, he said firmly. He laughed and put his hand on Luffy's chest where the hook had hit him. Luffy, I'm going ahead of you to Alubara, Naruto said, looking after Robin as she walked away. Women are still confusing and damnable sexy when they act mysteriously. I think you can defeat Crocodile. Don't be discouraged by your defeat. Instead, take it as motivation to try again. But, if I see it all going downhill even more, I'll beat him myself, he said, getting to his feet as Luffy only managed to nod. You're still young, so don't let losses break you. Instead, grow stronger from them and kick his ass when you cross this desert. Gazing at Pell's battered body, Naruto said, I'd appreciate it if you helped this boy get to Alubara. Who are you? Pell asked, blinking at the youthful-looking man who appeared to be much older. Before turning to water and taking off once more, Naruto responded, Uzumaki Naruto. One more hour is left. Alubara. The Straw Hat crew had split off on their arrival to lure the Baroque Works members to chase after each one while Vivi stayed behind. However, when she had attempted to stop the rebels, a cannonball had struck the gap in between, which obscured the rebels' vision of Vivi. Vivi ended up being trampled on by the horses. And it was only Karoo protecting her that really saved her. If one were to look at Alubara today, they would see the rebels and the royal army fighting at the large set of stairs that led into the large city, with more fighting up above. But now that he was standing on the roof of a tall building, Naruto knew that he could not get involved in the Straw Hats' fights or their plan, and he hated that. This is why he wanted his own crew, because even though they might be his friends or allies now, he couldn't be one of them because he was a leader and not a follower. He also knew that this was their challenge. And to get involved now would not only be harmful but also damage their pride, and he would only intervene if things seemed hopeless. Not a moment of fucking peace in this place, Naruto said, looking up on instinct just as a very large blade came down and sliced him in two. Though the two separate parts had water around the edges, demonstrating his Logia abilities at work, the sword was pulled back with surprising speed, and he heard someone landing behind him as his body reformed. Is that any way to say, hello, to someone you just met? He asked, turning as he saw 7 people standing around him, some on different buildings, but the one who had attacked him was directly in front of him. The one that had hit him said, "Save the smart-ass comments for after we defeat you." He was taller than himself, burly, and wore black pants and black shoes. His hair was black with 5 stripes from his forehead to the back of his head. With the rest of it balled up, he carried a huge claymore sword in his right hand, which is typically used with 2 hands. His face had a stony expression. "So," Naruto said, casting a bored glance at each of them, "who are you guys? All I see here right now are a bunch of idiots, so you really need to give me something." TCH, conceited jerk, a woman, with black eyes and black hair down her back, wearing a red sleeveless shirt, black trousers, and black shoes, pointed to the man who had spoken first and said, "That's Mr. 6 and I'm Miss Mother's Day." She had 2 guns in the back waistband of her trousers. Mr. A, man who must have been at least 9 years old, said, he was very muscular, more so than Mr. 6, and he wore nothing on his torso except for blue shorts and no shoes. He had no weapons on him and he just smirked. He was also bald, and if it weren't for the shorts, he was essentially naked. Miss, the second of the 4 women there, said, "Tuesday, handsome," with a wink and a smirk. She was very attractive, with green eyes, red hair in a ponytail, and red lipstick. She wore tight black pants that showed off her figure, and a tight white vest that showed off her body in amazing ways. Of course, Naruto was not looking at this because this was a battle, or soon to be one, and she had knives in her belt all the way around her waist, as well as armbands that probably contained knives. "I apologize, Miss, he's mine, but it's Tuesday, Miss." Even though she was dressed differently, in a black vest, white pants, and white shoes, and her body was identical, she said, "Thursday here, just for you." Things were terrible. They were twins, and he was screwed. Not in his preferred manner, either. In contrast to the previous 2 men, this one was slender and only slightly taller than Naruto. He had light blonde hair and was dressed in green slacks and an orange t-shirt. He carried 2 katana on his back. "I'm Mr. 12. Last but not least, my name is Miss." A woman with equally attractive features said, "Sunday." She had her blonde hair pulled back in a bun and was dressed in a form-fitting blue bodysuit with a yellow sash that gave her the appearance of a ninja. Looking at each of them, Naruto nodded and said, "So, how are you all doing? Did cannon fodder form a band merely to provide me with a task? I truly appreciate the gesture, but the only man in this country worth my time is or will be fighting someone else. We're not to be taken lightly." Mr. 10 cracked his knuckles and yelled. Mr. 6, who was obviously a man who obeyed orders, said almost robotically, "Boss Sama gave us a mission to kill you. That's what we'll do. I take it you're the frontier agents?" He received a round of nods. "And you still think you got me? Whoa, the Baroque works obviously don't require intelligence. I've had enough of the nonsense you're saying." Miss Mother's Day, who was on a different building and had to aim downward because her building was larger, said this as she took her guns out of the back of her waistband and held them pointed at Naruto. "You clearly don't know who you're dealing with." Naruto sighed. "Oh well, until the Straw Hats defeat the real agents, I've got nothing to do." When he saw a blur approaching him, he raised a hand just in time to see the blur leap and attempt to drop kick him, revealing Miss Sunday. He caught her foot, but she was not only quick but also nimble, bending her body so that she could kick him in the face with her other foot, only to have his head turn to water as the foot passed through it. Naruto simply threw the woman away as he reformed. Even though her ankle ached from where he had grabbed her, Miss Sunday whirled in midair and landed in a crouch. That's twice his body's turned to water now. He was hit by Mr. 6 once, and now we'll have to surprise him. Miss Mother's Day cocked her guns and fired at Naruto, saying, "Easy." She was shocked and terrified when Naruto appeared in front of Miss Mother's Day. After seemingly disappearing from his place, he grabbed her right wrist and snapped it easily, causing her to scream in pain and drop her gun. She struggled to raise her left hand, but was able to shoot Naruto in the head, which just passed right by him. Not so easy now, is it? Just as Mr. 12 was about to attack Naruto by pulling out his 2 katana and stabbing him, Miss Mother's Day spat at him, saying, "Bastard." To everyone's surprise, Naruto threw Miss Mother's Day at him and onto the blades that stuck out through her chest. "Why you, son of a TCH, got my blades a mess." He shook his blades to either side of him, splattering 2 lines of blood across the rooftop as he let Miss Mother's Day's body fall to the ground in a heap, blood pooling around her from the wounds while she still held her gun. "I don't enjoy killing, but I do it when I have to," Naruto said, shaking his head in disgust. "However, I find it disgusting when a person's partner complains about their weapons being dirty while showing no concern that they simply contributed to their death." She knew what she was getting into. Mr. 12 laughed. "It doesn't matter if we die. We knew the risks and it's her fault for being too weak." "I see." Naruto sprang into motion, and before any of them could stop him, He was standing in front of the man brandishing two swords, his hand raised to his chest in a gesture known as pre-flicking. Oni head poke. Mr. 12 dropped his swords just before he fell back as Naruto poked him in the forehead. The flick that followed should have been impossible by any standards as an invisible force struck him in the chest and blew a hole through the man, with the same invisible force striking a building behind him and blowing it up on contact. Enjoy hell. A moment later, he passed away. What on earth was that? Miss Tuesday yelled, bewildered and terrified that a man could blow a hole through someone with a flick of his hand. Who the fuck is this guy, sis? That's my question, Miss Thursday asked the question herself. They weren't going to survive anyhow, so Naruto responded, it's called haki, Busoshoku haki to be exact. It lets me use a force like invisible armor around myself, but I can also use it to enhance my attacks, project ahead of me as the brute force you just saw, or imbue it with a weapon to make it more effective. Of course, I'm not the only person in the world who can use it. Although I was strong before I could use it, it definitely makes fighting faster and easier. Miss Sunday swallowed and muttered, this guy's a monster. We have our mission, so it doesn't matter. Mr. 6 lunged at Naruto, slicing in a horizontal arc that sliced through him, but Naruto simply slammed a hand down on the blade hard enough to cause it to stab the building's roof. Mr. 10 used his now observed superhuman strength to jump at Naruto from the building he had been on and punch the roof, causing it to explode instantly as Mr. 6 tried to pull it out. Naruto then leapt from one building to another, and when the one he had been standing on finally collapsed, Mr. 6 jumped away with his sword, while Mr. 10 simply fell to the ground unharmed. It was a good way to get people upset and make mistakes, and the fact that he knew they couldn't hurt him made the fight more dull. Naruto looked at the 5 people who were still there and said, you guys are nothing but flies that offer nothing but some sport. It wasn't his opinion or arrogance. The fact was that they were unable to touch him. The battle was ultimately one-sided. Burrito Arashi. I hate to hurt handsome men like you, but the mission always interferes with what I want, Naruto said, looking up just in time to see Miss Tuesday slash her arms down at him and hurl a hail of knives from her wristbands. As water covered his arm, which he thrust upward, Naruto remained silent and exclaimed, Woda Karasha. Miss Thursday was like a blur as she leapt from her building and tackled Miss Tuesday out of the way. They crashed into the roof of another building as they were landing, and his water just splashed down into a street that washed everything away. Water Crusher. The collected water blasted up at Miss Tuesday, blasting the knives away or turning them to nothing under the water pressure. As the two started to get up, Naruto thought, so she cares about her sister, As she helped her twin sister up, Miss Tuesday said earnestly and with a small smile, thanks for the save, sis. Knowing that she had twisted her ankle on the landing, Miss Thursday gave a feeble smile and said, no problem, I just made it. Do not let your emotions interfere with the mission or I shall cut down where you stand, Mr. 6 said, frowning at the sisters. Understood, Naruto said, frowning at the man as the sisters acknowledged him. However, rather than losing people, doesn't it benefit us to maintain a large number for a greater advantage? Miss Thursday inquired. Mr. 6 raised his weapon and said, not at the cost of the mission. Before Naruto could say anything more, the building started to tremble violently, forcing him to look over the edge and see Mr. 10 using his superhuman strength to punch the bottom walls. You guys are beginning to piss me off, Naruto growled. Get down, you little jerk. Come get killed. Mr. 10 chuckled as he punched the wall once more, nearly tearing out the bottom floor and blowing the wall off completely. Naruto flipped in midair and backflipped off the building just as it was starting to fall apart, so he was falling head first toward the ground, or rather, he was falling toward Mr. 10 with a purpose. Mr. 10 looked up to see Naruto soar down towards him, lifting his hand up with his hands open to grab the blonde with a grin that gave the impression that he had already won. As Naruto approached, he tore his cloak and threw at the burly man to divert his attention while he flew down, blew the cloak away from the speed, and slammed his fists into Mr. 10's open palms, causing the man to widen as he felt his hands snap. With a sly grin, Naruto pushed Mr. 10 onto his back with such force that the ground shook. He then crouched down on Mr. 10 and put his feet on his stomach, pushing off before lowering himself again with his hands ready to punch the man who was gasping. Ryokan. As Naruto destroyed the man with savage and an incalculable number of fast-paced punches, his hands turned into a blur. Thunder King fist. Given his strength, nobody wanted to be Mr. 10 at this point. Until what appeared to be the final blow sent a shockwave through the area and blew away the street beneath him and the buildings surrounding him, forcing the remaining Baroque Works member to quickly flee. Dust and rock were blown from Naruto's position as he continued punching away, creating fissures that ran along the sandy streets and up nearby buildings. Naruto was standing in a large crater, 10 feet into the ground, with a large diameter that still had cracks running from the edge, when a large cloud of smoke that had gathered blew away in the wind behind Naruto was Mr. Ten's bloody, beaten, and, to be honest, squashed body. His face was unrecognizable, his bones appeared to have been smashed to pieces, and blood, likely all of his blood, surrounded him. With his long waistcoat blowing in the wind, his longer hair ruffled, and his head down, Naruto looked pretty intimidating, especially with the blood dripping from his knuckles, which was obviously not his own. His black cloak was long gone, though, so he was unable to conceal his appearance from anyone else any longer, unless he got another, which he couldn't do at the moment. Who the hell is this guy? As she and her sister stood nearby atop the ruins of the building they had been on before Naruto's unadulterated strength sent a shockwave that destroyed it, Miss Tuesday swallowed in terror. Remember what needs to be done. As Miss Sunday ran at him with Mr. 12's fallen katana, which she had picked up because, despite her great speed, she lacked any actual weapons, Naruto heard the faint sound of swords scraping the ground. She dragged the two blades along the ground as she blew past the other three members of the Baroque works and made a huge leap into the sky before spinning downward at Naruto like a buzz saw as the katanas vibrated through the air. Moreover, Mr. 12 wasn't using them where he was now. When she approached, Naruto sprang into motion quickly once more. His hand shot up, and he somehow managed to grab one of the blades, halting Miss Sunday's attack completely as she hung there, staring down at him with wide eyes, not even showing blood from where he had grabbed the sword. Too slow, his right fist appeared, and he struck the woman in the stomach, saying, "Ikatsu," single bone, before the full force of his punch blasted Miss Sunday out of the air and down the street, where she crashed into the ground and continued rolling before coming to a complete stop, motionless. The only sounds that came as his fist made contact were those of bones being smashed in. Miss Sunday spat out globs of blood. It would be extremely difficult for her to survive given the number of broken bones. Looking over at the somewhat apprehensive twins, Mr. 6, who had been evaluating Naruto's strength, scowled as he saw the damage that a single blow had caused to Miss Sunday, not to mention the complete devastation that his rapid-fire punches had caused earlier. "This is no time to be afraid," he said. "You will only cause yourself problems if you allow your emotions to get in the way. Let me kill you right now if that's the case." "So, you guys operate like this, huh? What hope do you have?" Naruto inquired, glancing at the final three people across from him. "To be honest, without my weapons or my strong methods, I've already killed 4 of you because your boss doesn't want me to thwart his plans. You are only here to keep me occupied while everyone else quarrels." They would have flirted with him knowing that twins were a weakness to many men, regardless of their level of self-control, and that they would be able to kill them. However, with this man, they would be lucky if having sex with each other would prevent the man from killing them. Miss Thursday swallowed at that, feeling fear grip her from the hard reality that either way, she and her sister would be killed. Miss Tuesday must have thought the same thing, because she shivered in some fear as well. WES surrender. They weren't used to this. After all, they were only frontier agents, and fighting someone like the one in front of them was suicide. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the two women in tight clothing, who didn't appear to be evil people, but appearances could be deceiving. What? Mr. 6, who was obviously born to be someone's bitch, gave them the same robotic look and said, "Worthless cowards." Miss Tuesday swallowed the attention once more and said, "I said we surrender." "And how do I know you mean that?" Naruto sighed. "What gives me the assurance that you won't simply go and attack one of my friends?" This time, Miss Thursday said, "We just want to live. We don't want this life, we promise. We only ever wanted to be a part of something, so we seized the opportunity when it was presented to us." After a moment, Naruto said, "I see." The twins froze when the obviously stronger man approached, and although they both knew they could possibly avoid him with their own speed and reflex, they doubted they would get far. Mr. 6 did not like this display of betrayal to Baroque works and shot towards the twin with the intention of cutting them down with his large sword. Before Mr. 6 could complete his move, Naruto made a blur in front of him and kicked the big sword upward, causing Mr. 6 to stagger back. Naruto then executed a palm thrust that sent the man sprawling across the floor. "Now get out of here," he said, turning to face the twins. "Don't waste the one chance I'm giving you. I've lived long enough to be able to read people, and I know you're telling the truth, so just go ahead, create a fulfilling life for yourself and find happiness." Naruto didn't know where they went, and at the moment, he had more important things to worry about than where Miss Tuesday and Miss Thursday went, so they just nodded their gratitude before turning tail and fleeing. No matter where those two run, Baroque works will hunt them down and kill them. Mr. 6 got up from where he had stopped using his sword, and when he looked across the somewhat long distance he had been thrown, He saw Naruto standing with his arms crossed and his face set to stone. It was obvious that he stopped joking around when he was in a fight, or he could have just been angry. "You speak as if Baroque works will still exist after today," Naruto said, chuckling a little as he uncrossed his arms to straighten his waistcoat and dust off his bare chest. "As we speak, the Straw Hats are kicking the asses of your fellows. That also applies to Crocodile's ass." The first indication of genuine emotion was the surprise rise in Mr. Six's eyebrows. "Crocodile of the Shichibukai? Is he our boss?" More for laughs than anything else, Naruto chuckled at that. "You've been obeying orders and you didn't even know whose. If he has you tethered to his finger like this, then you're his bitch, okay?" He shook his head. "You know what?" He pulled Blue Rose out of its holster and fired much more quickly now that he was not wearing his cloak. "I'm tired of wasting time, so I'll just do this." It all took place in a single second. The fact that Blue Rose fired 2 bullets and that they weren't normal was not taken into consideration by Mr. Six, who surprisingly demonstrated his speed by having his sword up to block a bullet. Naruto turned away from the gory scene and holstered his gun when both bullets pierced the sword cleanly and struck his body, blowing out his innards and dropping to the ground dead with a stunned expression on his face. "Everyone else is fighting. I better see what the situation is with Vivi," he said, shaking his head as he surveyed the demolished area. "Crocodile may have begun to move since Robin-chan will betray her for the poneglyph." He sighed as he considered Robin. "She deserves more. I only hope she finds it. If I know her as well as I think I do, then she'll probably go after the king and use Vivi to get him to do what she wants. I can't blame her for keeping people out after what happened to her house, but I can attest that it only makes life more lonely." He sighed again and started walking toward the king's palace. The king's palace. Koza. Vivi had to stand back and watch as Koza, her childhood friend and, ironically, the rebel leader, was killed while he stood between the rebel and imperial forces, begging them to stop fighting. Despite the king's efforts to stop them, the angry rebels clearly only needed one spark to ignite their rage, and Vivi tried shouting for them to stop the rebellion because it was all just Crocodile's trickery, but the man in question had summoned a sandstorm to drown out her voice in the midst of the fighting. She was therefore compelled to watch from her vantage point at King's Palace, crying uncontrollably as women and men were killed while fighting pointlessly. "Please stop. It's so unfortunate that your voice won't reach them over this sandstorm," Nico Robin said, standing next to a captive King Cobra and watching the events unfold carelessly. "Isn't it a lively battle, little girl?" "Get away from him, Vivi," Cobra said, spotting Crocodile approaching Vivi, who was still too distracted by watching her people fight and defied his restraints to defend his beloved daughter. "Hurry." Either out of courage or because she knew that running would be futile, she chose to face him instead of fleeing as told. "This sandstorm is your doing? As long as I can stop the cannon in 15 minutes I can reduce the amount of casualties," she was told, but all she got was a smug grin. "You can stop the uprising this way. You can stop the uprising that way," Crocodile said, his smirk fading to a simple grit of teeth against his cigar before she could blink. He reached out and put his hand around her neck, saying, "Wake up, princess. This is reality, and your dream isn't. Only the powerful have the ability to make dreams come true." Vivi's eyes began to well up with tears. "I don't care if it's not realistic. I'll rescue this nation. It is my home and I am its princess. And I will stop at nothing to re-establish this as our home." Cobra gazed at his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "Vivi." Crocodile just rolled his eyes. "The cannon will fire in 15 minutes. The rebellion's reinforcements are on their way." He held Vivi out over the edge of their elevated position and said, "If you had told the loyalists about the blast, you would have caused chaos, but you would have saved thousands of lives. Your fate is sealed along with the blast area." "Crocodile, stop it, now stop it," King Cobra roared from his prisoner's quarters. "You believed that everyone could be saved?" Crocodile laughed and said, "How innocent thus. You ultimately cause everyone to perish. No one will know any different from now on. Although I appreciate the 2 years you spent working for Baroque Works, you ultimately had no say in the matter, either rebelling or saving the nation. Whatever dull ideals you choose to support would have always led to more deaths. You cannot save this country. I tell you." He dropped Vivi over the edge with that. "Vivi. No." As his daughter vanished from view, Cobra screamed in alarm. As she fell, Vivi closed her eyes, expecting to feel the hard impact of the ground, but instead she felt a soft impact before the wind pushed against her face. She opened one eye to see what was happening, but it wasn't that which made her blink in shock. "And Naruto-san. Fancy meeting you here, Vivi-heim." Naruto smiled down at her as they appeared just above the ledge from which she had been thrown, facing the astonished eyes of Cobra, Robin, and the enraged ones of Crocodile. In fact, it was Naruto who had caught her mid-fall and was now flying back up with his legs reduced to water. Oh, Poseidon! Crocodile let out a growl and nearly plunged his teeth into his cigar in rage. When the blonde landed on the ledge with his legs reformed, Cobra just stared at him. Uzumaki, Naruto? He muttered in surprise. So you made it here. I didn't expect the frontier agents to slow you down. What will you do now? Uzumaki Naruto. Robin grinned to herself as she examined Naruto, who was no longer wearing a cloak, giving her a good view of his muscular body, which she liked. I made it just in time to save Vivi. I'm here, Naruto said, letting Vivi down easily but making sure to stand slightly in front of her because Crocodile was only a few feet away. If I had been as weak as they were, the cannon fodder you sent after me to delay me would have been effective. Crocodile, you underestimated me. Crocodile simply grinned at him. So you killed those other failures in Mr. 6? You must be the next person to fall at my feet since Straw Hat Luffy was unable to kill me, he said, holding out his arm that was covered in sand, including his sharp-pointed hand as he flew at Naruto. His legs turned to sand. Drought Supada. With amazing speed and force, his right hand, which had been transformed into a loose blade of swiftly moving sand, slashed down at Naruto with the desert sword. Out of instinct, Naruto lifted his hand up instead of moving like Vivi, who hid behind him. A flash of energy left his hand and appeared as a mirror just inches from his hand, and when the sand blade hit the mirror, nothing took place as he continued to push against the mirror. Crocodile felt an amazing resistance as if his hand were being repelled from even touching it. He furrowed his brows and stared as his blade of sand did nothing but push against the mirror without leaving any mark. Impossible. Why has my Drought Supada never blocked before? I don't really feel like telling you why such a weak attack won't break through my own. Crocodile allowed his hand to return to normal and drifted back to where he once stood, reforming his legs. And to answer your first question, Naruto said, grinning up at him while holding his hand in place. Naruto pointed to the sky, and they all looked up. I'm not here to fight you. He is a crocodile. Damn! Crocodile gritted his teeth as a voice he believed he had silenced yelled from the sky, Straw Hat Luffy. That damn child. Luffy was approaching the palace directly on a huge falcon. Naruto laughed and said, he took his time. Then he turned to Vivi and put one arm around her waist, saying, come on, this isn't our place right now. He stepped off the raised landing carelessly with his arm around Vivi. Kaya. As they fell, Vivi screamed and held onto Naruto while the wind blew her hair back and blasted her face. We're on ground now, Vivi Heim, Naruto said, bending his knees to land safely and nearly laughing when he noticed Vivi curled up around his arm. You can open. Smack. Never do that yet. While nursing her now sore hand, Vivi yelled at him, why didn't you turn into water? I can choose when to turn my body into water or not. An ow, Naruto said, rubbing the back of his head in surprise at how forcefully she had hit him. How in hell did you pick up that kind of hitting? Now is not the time to play around. The palace is going to be bombed. There isn't any time left, Vivi cried, her lip quivering with anxiety, which caused Naruto to become serious as she looked down. Nobody will be able to hear me, and everyone will perish if this keeps up. The nation will. He put a hand on her shoulder and said, hey, don't worry. His smile caught her eye as she looked up at him. Luffy won't let Crocodile win. Your voice was heard by all, and the Straw Hats will not allow anyone to harm your people or blow up your house. Ah. When Naruto and Vivi turned around, they saw Chopper gaping at them. Is Luffy still alive? Hey Tony-kun. Vivi cried out in surprise and joy. With a smile on his face, Naruto gestured toward the palace and said, he's alive and about to kick Crocodile's ass. Usopp approached Chopper from behind, his eyes watering, his wounds wrapped like a mummy. See? You see? I was aware of it. As he approached, smoking a cigarette as if nothing were wrong, Sanji shook his head and said, yeah, is that the face of someone who knew it? Usopp. Sanji. As they all started to congregate, Vivi yelled. Hi, Vivi? Why are you all so severely injured? They all turned to see Nami wailing over to them with a grin which turned into a scowl as she looked at Usopp. Usopp. Nami hit him in the back with her new Klima tact staff and roared. Nami. Vivi exclaimed in joy, ignoring Usopp's pitiful cries. Mr. Bushido, everyone is present. Who requested that you create a fucking party toy for me? Oh whatever, you can walk just fine, she said, dropping a severely injured Zoro who was standing irately, seemingly ready to attack. Considering that he was merely a body of bandages, Usopp gave her a weak and pathetic look, but it worked just fine, didn't it? Nami narrowed her eyes and pointed at him, saying, I'll kick your ass later. Getting their attention, Naruto said, well then, since you're all here, there's no need for me to stick around any longer. He turned to face the sky again, where he could see Luffy at the edge as Pell descended in his falcon form. "You guys have a mission to do," he said. "No matter what happens, Vivi, don't give up. This nation will soon return to its former state." "Hold on," Nami called just before Naruto could fly up. "Is this it? Shall we see you again?" "What? You're heading out now?" Usopp cried out, but Zoro covered his mouth with his hand. "This isn't any sort of goodbye, but from here it's probably the last time we'll see each other for a while," Naruto said, sighing as he turned to face them as Pell landed beside Vivi. "Each of you must travel your own path. Luffy will be put to the test by me to see if he has what it takes to live. I can't stay much longer, but after Crocodile is vanquished, I'll do everything in my power to alleviate the nation's drought." "Why not?" Chopper asked, tilting his head and frowning in confusion. Zoro shook his head and muttered, "Idiot. He's referred to as the world's most wanted pirate. Do you know what that would mean for Alabasta? Smoker knows that he is now truly alive and will soon be contacting Marine headquarters. Every Marine on duty will target it if they think he's still alive." "Whoa. Really?" Chopper gazed up at Naruto in wonder. "Furthermore, they will target you if they discover that I am in any way an ally of yours. Smoker is aware that I assisted you in Rainbase and Nanohana, but there isn't any concrete proof." With a sigh, Naruto explained, "To the Marines, I'm too dangerous to let wander the earth. It would be better if it stayed that way." Bit by bit, his feet turned to water. "I won't say goodbye, because I know we'll meet again, so I'll see you later. The Marines have gotten much stronger since my time, many years ago, and if I want to make a name for myself again and go after One Piece myself, I need to find my own crew." Pell stepped forward to bow to Naruto and said, "Uzumaki Naruto, thank you for taking care of and protecting Vivi-sama." After a quick look back, he said, "Think nothing of it, it was my pleasure." He gave Vivi a smile and said, "Later." His legs were now just water and hovering. "Next time we see each other, I won't let you slip through my fingers again. I always get what I want in the end," Nami said, gazing up after him with a hopeful sad smile. Vivi also looked up, but she was grinning. "Thank you for helping us, Naruto-kun. I hope we see each other again someday." From where he had been dropped by Pell, Luffy launched himself at Crocodile. "Straw Hat Luffy, do you not understand? You will never hit me. No matter how hard you try. Do you want to be impaled by my hook once more? Is that it?" "Gomu Gomu no." Luffy disregarded his words and flew at him, punching Crocodile, which hit the visibly shocked man in the jaw and sent him flying, causing him to spit up blood from the force of the impact. "Gomu Gomu no." Luffy didn't stop the thought as he skidded along the ground and threw his hands at Crocodile while his legs started spinning quickly. "Who is that?" When Cobra saw someone really hit Crocodile, she asked in amazement. "Hey, boy." As he stopped himself from sliding, Crocodile snarled and Luffy grabbed him by the lapels of his coat, gritting his teeth. Crocodile looked down at the Straw Hat's hands and arms, thinking, could he really have? But he didn't have time to consider that because Luffy's legs gained enough momentum to propel him off the ground and spin toward his opponent, delivering a powerful headbutt. Murunoko. Gum Gum Buzzsaw. Crocodile was sent flying once more and landed on his back whilst blood spilled from his forehead. Luffy was able to backflip from the attack and land on his feet with a grin. "Hee. I got you." "This boy," Cobra murmured again, incredulously. When Robin saw her partner and boss fall to the ground, she grinned and said, "Hey." Cobra and Robin turned to their right and saw Naruto standing there, smiling, saying, "Looks like Luffy's got it handled up here. There's no need for me to interfere right now." Naruto Uzumaki. "So it really is you, old friend," Naruto said, grinning at the king as Cobra asked in a perplexed manner, "Why haven't you changed in 30 or so years?" When asked the question, Naruto's smile wavered a little, and Robin was taken aback by the agony and sorrow in his eyes. "If I knew the answer, old friend, I'd tell you," Robin said. "However, I don't know as much as anyone else does." He doesn't know why he doesn't age like normal people. How can one not know such a significant detail? Robin's eyebrows shot up at the response. Even though he was glad to see an old friend from a long time ago, Cobra gave that a sad smile. "I see, it's nice to see you again in spite of the circumstances we're in." Robin's gentle voice said, "Uzumaki Naruto, do you still choose to just observe?" Naruto turned back to the fight and said, "Of course he doesn't need any help." As he gazed at Crocodile's prone body, Luffy gasped a little, "Crocodile, get up, get up." He was kept wet by the pipe that ran from the barrel on his back. "At the time I lost the water from Yuba made me notice something. He said you cannot change into sand if you come into contact with water. You detest the rain because of this, because it frightens you. I can beat you this way as long as I stay wet. I won't lose this time. The show is just getting started." At the rubber boy, Robin shook her head and said, no matter what he does, he won't win. Is that correct? Or are you trying to convince yourself that he can't win? Naruto asked, turning to face Robin, since you won't be unsure of what to think in that manner? That simply dying would be more convenient for him? I'm sorry, but that isn't how the world operates. Simply watch the fight and then form your own opinions. He ignored Robin's response to his statement and returned his attention to the fight. As long as she started to think that the seemingly impossible was possible, it didn't matter. Pirates in straw hats. What? As the conflict raged around them between the royal family and the rebels, Usopp shouted to Vivi, you want me to find the shooter? How on earth am I going to accomplish that? With a determined nod, Vivi said, we only have 10 minutes, so there's no time to think about. Since the diameter of the blast is about 5 kilometers or so, the enemy should be at least 5 kilometers away, Usopp said, scowling and cupping his chin thoughtfully. No. They were all caught off guard when Vivi yelled, the shooters might be very near here. What? Usopp exclaimed with wide eyes. How? The shooter will be here if they are. Crocodile is that sort of person, Nami said, clenching her fists and gritting her teeth. He snarled, killing his own nakama. One of the disguised soldiers from Baroque Works attempted to attack Vivi from behind, but before he could even hope to swing his weapon, Zoro and Sanji swiftly and effectively took him down with a kick to the face and a sword slash, alerting the others to the fact that they were surrounded by members of the Billions from Baroque Works, all of whom were fighting for Vivi's blood. Fuck it. Usopp cried out in terror and panic. We've located you at last, Princess Vivi. We'll get promoted if we kill you. Additionally, we will become millionaires. Even though Sanji and Zoro were already in the lead, Nami said, well, aren't they ambitious? As she assumed a stance with her Klima tact. How much time do you intend to take? Sanji asked his rival, or Nakama. With a shrug, Zoro said, we have to make every second count. 2 seconds. As they swiftly eliminated every man, the Straw Hats split up to locate the bomb more quickly because they had a limited amount of time before it detonated. Both men yelled at the same time before closing in on the millions. Vivi bit her lower lip in anxiety as she ran, asking herself, can this country really be saved? As pictures of her friends appeared in her mind. Thanks to you all, I've made it this far. I know with you, we can save this country. Crocodile versus Luffy. Crocodile chuckled at Luffy while sitting on the ground. Do you believe you can defeat me? Without even blinking, Luffy replied, yes, you were able to see through my trick even though I was in such danger. You're still young, though, so you believe that's all there is to it? You're mistaken. I am a member of the Shichibukai. You know, Crocodile chuckled even harder at Luffy's ridiculous belief that he could defeat him. Luffy prepared himself for anything by assuming his fighting stance. Huh? Are you a Shichibukai member? In that case, I'll just be the 8th of you. That man is, Cobra said, stared in wonder at Luffy. Have you not heard that he is also a pirate? So the princess gets to live a little longer, Robin said, glancing at Cobra. So he's the one who brought Vivi back? Cobra asked. After glancing at them and then Luffy, Naruto grinned and said, doesn't he remind you of someone? As he looked at his old friend, Cobra had to laugh at the irony of it all. HM. I understand what you mean, though you are rivals. The same thing was once said about you. Rogers and my time is over, Robin said. Listening with increasing interest, however, he grinned and said, but that doesn't mean I'll let Luffy become Pirate King without any competition. We're just here to pave the way for their era to take over. As they turned back to the battle, Cobra only said, I see. Despite being pinned to the wall as a prisoner at the moment, he was still pleased to see an old friend. No Barretto. Gomu Gomu. Gum Gum Bullet. Luffy threw one arm far behind him and then snapped it back to strike Crocodile's face with a strong, short-range blow with one-fisted. He grabbed Luffy's arm and said, attacks of this kind are too easy to dodge. Crocodile simply shifted his head to the side to avoid the blow. Is your hand wet now? As he started sucking the excess water from Luffy's arm, he remarked, remember that I can also absorb water. It's over. In our earlier fight, you said by using the devil fruit powers in different ways you can become stronger. Luffy poured more water onto himself before launching another long punch at Crocodile before sending both fists at him. Gomu Gomu no Gachiringu. Luffy rushed at Crocodile and launched a kick that stretched his leg across the distance that only ended with his foot going through Crocodile's head as he partially turned into his element. Crocodile was able to barely avoid each blow before leaping backwards to avoid it entirely as Luffy used his stretching ability to bring his fists forward repeatedly in a fast-paced, hazy barrage of powerful punches that gave the impression that he had multiple arms forming an almost unreadable pattern. Gum Gum Gatling. Sneaky. He dragged his prominent hook across the ground to stop his movement as sand gathered around his only hand. Dazato Supada. He struck Luffy with a blade of sand from his desert sword. Another attack. Luffy jumped to the side, just the large blade cut the ground all the way through to the edge and blew off part of the edge. He panted as he looked down the large crevice the attack had made. Phew, that was dangerous. Luffy abruptly withdrew his fist and charged at Crocodile, saying, "Repeating your attacks is getting..." Crocodile was about to say something when Luffy suddenly slapped him across the face. "I've been planning this from the start," he shouted as he took the water barrel from his back and aimed the hose at Crocodile and sprayed him, "to get you soaked." Crocodile formed a whirlwind of sand in his palm and said, "Of course you did, Sables." Sandstorm. Crocodile hurled the sandstorm at Luffy, blowing the barrel and the devil fruit eater away. When Luffy noticed his water barrel tumbling toward the floor, he extended his arms to grab it. "Oh! Water barrel, water barrel." Luffy caught his barrel before it could smash on the ground, landing on the edge of the castle walls. Phew. As he got back up, Crocodile laughed and said, "Kuhahaha, Straw Hat, you're really into this fight, aren't you? You're out of tricks if you lose your barrel of water, aren't you? If that's the case, how have you changed since I last trashed you, Kuhahaha?" After glaring at Crocodile, Luffy glanced down at his barrel and said, "You're right, it wouldn't be any different." Luffy yanked the pump off the barrel, drank all the water from it, and then smashed it to the ground. "So what about this? I'm different from the last time if it's like this." With a look of incredulity on his face, Crocodile said, "You're not serious." After consuming all of the water in the barrel, Luffy's stomach swelled to the size of a gigantic balloon. "Water, Luffy." With a noise similar to a hole being popped in a balloon, water started coming out of Luffy's belly button. "Oh no, I'm leaking. Man, I'm glad my devil fruit doesn't do that to me," Naruto said, raising both of his eyebrows in response to the scene. "I doubt that I could display myself in public." When Robin saw Luffy, she chuckled softly into her hand, saying, "He sure is something, isn't he?" "Is this kid serious?" Crocodile asked, his fist clenched at his side. "Doesn't he understand the situation? Does this kid think he can really underestimate me or something?" Crocodile just stared as Luffy panicked at his leaking water, his eyes glowing with anger as veins appeared around his eyes and forehead. "You goddamn kid. What on earth are you making this up about?" Luffy's response was to squeeze his stomach, forcing water up his throat and spitting a ball of water at Crocodile's face, completely soaking him and immobilizing him. "Who's kidding? Damn that Straw Hat, my body won't move," Crocodile said, locking his teeth at Luffy. "I never mince words." Luffy stretched both his arms far back and then hurled them forward, striking Crocodile with both instantaneously with a double open palm strike. Gomu Gomu no Bazooka. Gum Gum Bazooka. As soon as he struck Crocodile, Luffy was blown back slightly since he was just a water balloon at this point, whilst Crocodile was blasted into a wall that began to crumble down on them. "Hey. Greetings, Crocodile." As he watched Luffy smash Crocodile into a wall, Cobra gritted his teeth and said, "This all seems so hard to believe." However, a moment later, Robin used her powers to remove the spikes that were pinning Crocodile to the wall. She dropped the spikes to the ground and said, "You should hurry up and take me to the place where the true history is written. Right now isn't the time to appreciate it just yet, King Cobra." "Why do you want to see such a thing?" Cobra asked Robin, giving him the only scowl he could manage in his current condition. "What do you have planned?" With a steely gaze, Robin's face lost all of its humor and amusement as she used her powers to grow extra hands around Cobra's body and manipulate them into a successful but painful submission hold. "It doesn't matter to you," Robin said. "It looks like your luck is about to run out," she said with a sly smile as Luffy turned to face them. "Just take me there." Crocodile came out with a furious expression on his face as the sand pushed away the debris that had covered him. "Come on, Nico Robin. In order to avoid being reduced to nothing but bones, I am furious with this child." With closed eyes and a smile, Robin nodded. "As you wish." She turned to Naruto, who did nothing but move his hand to his gun when she heard Cobra. "How about you, Uzumaki Naruto? It would be counterproductive for you to stay given who you are." Naruto hardly gave her a look. "Robin-chan, how many times do I have to tell you? This is where I belong. I'm sure you won't act hastily with my old friend there, am I right? I take it you want to see the true history, after all?" Given the way he phrased it, Robin arched an eyebrow at him. "Very well, however, I have to tell you that the battle was over the instant Straw Hat Luffy showed up here," she said, starting to leave. Crocodile put his hand on the ground and almost immediately all of the grass turned yellow, followed by the trees, and then the entire ground started to dry out and crack as if an earthquake had struck it before splitting open. "Straw Hat Luffy. Listen to me," Crocodile said, smiling evilly. Every rock on this earth will be destroyed. Through the crack that had formed, Luffy started to fall. That bastard, water gun. The man merely lifted his hand and sucked the water into it, even though he spit out globs of water at Crocodile. He used his hand to absorb it as easy as that? You believe you eliminated my water Luffy ability? Then you're a bigger idiot than I ever could have guessed. You see, the power of aridity is the only factor that determines the power of sand. There are no limits to what this right hand can dry, even dirt, rocks, or trees. As Crocodile applied his power to everything in his immediate vicinity, the ground trembled. Return everything to sand. As Luffy looked down, he saw that everything had changed to sand, including statues, doors, trees, and even grass. Rocks. Rocks turned into sand too. Grr. And my sandals. Everything my right hand comes into contact with will turn to sand. Crocodile chuckled as everything started to deteriorate and die. Ground seco. Ground drying. Crocodile continued to turn the once beautiful royal palace in Alabasta into a wasteland. He's stronger than I thought he was. I'm not even sure what our powers would do to each other, but I do know he would be a difficult person for me to fight. Naruto, hovering just above the destroyed land, narrowed his eyes and said, that's all the more reason he should be on my crew. Knock a little sense into him along with bribery and it should be no problem. He looked down to where the fighting was still going on and said, damn, that guy's right hand can make the palace's lawn turn a desert. Luffy pulled himself up on a ledge that overlooked the area where they had been fighting. Where did he go? I was exhausted from this little altercation. Luffy looked up to see Crocodile reform from sand standing on the ledge he was currently holding on to. He reached down and grabbed Luffy around the neck with his right hand. Luffy tried to spit a water ball at Crocodile again but missed as Crocodile moved his head. You didn't hit me this time, Straw Hat. Luffy pathetic. Just like he had just done so to the palace lawn, he began absorbing Luffy's fluid from his body, which was causing his skin to shrivel up and even caused his bones to show. For the second time, you lose. As the Shichibukai member gazed up at the enormous clock tower, Luffy's body, which was now entirely shriveled and wrinkled, could only be released from Crocodile's hold. This is a good way for you to die, the member said. He threw Luffy high into the air and said, this whole area and this yard will be destroyed in just 6 minutes, so just keep quiet and enjoy the show. Celebrate the arrival of a new king and a new sand nation. He let Luffy's body lifelessly hit the ground. Sorry, I'm rushing. I must leave. The body of Crocodile turned to sand and was carried away by the wind. So I believe she was referring to the tomb on the west side. The only people who had the right to help were his crew. He was just a tag along to the Straw Hats, and it would take more than Crocodile to get Naruto to jump in and help Luffy. Naruto sighed at another loss for Luffy from where he was currently walking towards the downed pirate. Although he could have obviously helped him, he didn't think he really had a right to jump in. It was Luffy's fight and he wouldn't ask for help. You giving up already? Naruto asked, glancing down at the pathetic-looking figure of a dried-up rubber man. As he approached, he looked up curiously as a tiny shadow on the ground appeared to get bigger, but the thing approaching them made him smile and shake his head. What star were you born under to be so damn lucky? He moved aside in time to see the pool of water that Crocodile had avoided return and suffocate Luffy. Ooh-ah! I thought I was dead for sure. Luffy yelled as his body came back to life and he leapt to his feet, gasping for air before turning to face Naruto. Why didn't you stop him? He wasn't my guy to beat, he was yours, and taking that away from you would only make you angry and worse, crush your pride. Naruto shrugged as he started to enter his element. Go ahead and kick his ass now. You only have one more chance. I gotta find him then, I'm not letting him go that easily. Luffy smiled and nodded his head before getting to his feet. He started running in one direction, and Naruto counted down the seconds until he returned with a sheepish grin without saying anything. Naruto jabbed his thumb in the opposite direction, and Luffy took off like a bullet. Just as his entire body, save for his head, turned to water, Naruto glanced off into the distance. The conclusion is almost here. Without making a sound, his head turned to water, and the glob of water splashed onto the sand and was absorbed, exposing Naruto as nothing more than a clone. Having a good time with a folded piece of paper in one hand and a knife in the other, Naruto approached the mast, pressed the paper up against it, raised the dagger, and stabbed the top of the paper into it so that it would not be easily ripped or blown off, then wrote on the blank side of the paper using a pencil he had hidden behind his ear. I hope you guys understand why I have to do this, he said, tossing the pencil over the side of the boat. When he was done, I would hate to be your adversary when we next meet. He sighed and turned to face the ledge he had stepped on. He took a step forward and fell off, heading for the water, but as before, his whole body turned to water and splashed into the sea.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.